Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What if Deku becomes ancient Norse god? Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. There are people born to power. They have connections and people that support them, they have the money to endorse ideas, they can buy all the resources needed. Then, there were people who were born to fail. Izuku Midoriya believed himself to be in the latter category of life. He desperately wanted to be a hero, but by the twists of fate, it seemed he was not destined to be one. Everyone around him made sure he knew that too. People seemed to get a real kick out of putting him down, telling him how stupid his dreams were and how pathetic he was for still believing in them. This had been going on for years. How long does it take to kill a child's dream? Izuku would say about 10 years, and he was really stretching it. Many would have been defeated on day one. Let's call him an outlier for making it this far, still grasping onto his dreams with torn and burned hands. It all came down to one final blow. His hero told him to be realistic about his dreams. Yeah, be realistic, Izuku. Being a hero is all about having a quirk. It's all about being special and showing the world your quirk can help save lives. He almost burst out laughing when All Might, in his small shrunken form, left him with his thoughts. He would have, if his throat hadn't been so tight. If he hadn't felt like he was drowning right then and there, when his only lifeline had snapped. The rose-colored glasses that he had fought so hard to keep on, to view the world as a place of hope, were shattered by the very person who had inspired them. That day, as his hero disappeared down the stairs, leaving him to drown under the weight of a life that now felt worthless, he wrote down his first true criticism of the ultimate hero. He left a teen who had just been attacked by a villain and had his dreams shattered on a roof. Izuku turned to look out at the city, his eyes drawn to the sound of explosions and smoke. Believe that you'll be born with a quirk in your next life and take a last chance dive off the roof. He took a half step toward the edge. He hadn't really thought about what Kaken said. It had been mean like everything else he tended to say, but now, it held some kind of appeal. He couldn't though. Was he a coward, too afraid to get close to the edge? Did he have something to live for? I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. He supposed he did have something to live for. His mother would be sad if he jumped. If she heard on the news they found someone on the sidewalk, or if she worried for days while police identified him and contacted her. He let out a bone-deep sigh as he walked himself down from the building and away from the sounds of fighting. There was no point anymore. Years of journals, empty pens, and analysis notes gone to waste. Not that they were any good to anyone but him. Everyone told him how creepy it was when he took notes on them. The buzz of anxiety under his skin had him walking at a nervous pace back home. It ran through his head, asking 1,000 questions he didn't know the answers to. You filled in the high school application yesterday, remember? Are you going to change it? What are you going to do with your notebooks? What are you going to do now? What was he going to do? Well, for that day, he was going to go to bed and pretend that Kaken hadn't told him to jump from a roof. Pretend that his hero hadn't told him to stop dreaming of something unattainable. Pretend that the world didn't feel like it was falling away beneath him. Like he could still see hope in front of him. He had never thought his dream was unattainable. He thought if he tried hard enough, if he trained harder than anyone, he could make it too. It was a lie he told himself. A lie that kept him seeing through those rosy glasses before they were ripped from him by the one person who could rip it away. So he slept. When he woke up, he barely had enough strength to get out of bed. His alarm blared beside him, and yet he let the annoying noise continue as he looked at his ceiling. It wasn't until his mother called for him that he finally turned the alarm off and got ready for school. Izuku, Sorry, I've got some things to do before school, so I'm going to leave early today, Izuku interrupted before she could talk him into sitting down for breakfast. He didn't look up. He didn't want to see that look she would give him. Even the look she gave him last night made his stomach churn. He didn't want to talk or think or even look at anyone. She could probably see something was wrong and he didn't want to face the question or force a smile. He already knew what she would ask. Izuku dear, what's wrong? What was wrong was everything. Where would he even begin to answer that question? If he looked for comfort in the wake of what All Might said, he knew it would be empty. He knew his mother would agree with what he said. She had proven that she did not approve of his dream nor think it was possible. He hurried into the bathroom to finish getting ready and closed the door behind him. As he brushed his teeth, he made a point to not look in the mirror too long. If he did, he would see the dark circles under his eyes from not being able to sleep and the deep hurt that haunted his gaze. The exhaustion went beyond sleep. It seeped from his very bones as he came to terms that all his efforts had been in vain. "Be realistic," he muttered in the mirror as he put his toothbrush down. "Fine," he continued as he walked back to his room, pulled on his backpack, and headed to the door for his shoes. "Do you want me to pack you breakfast for later?" his mother asked, but he didn't turn around to face her. "I'm not very hungry this morning, but thank you for thinking of me," Izuku said more politely and detached than he intended to as he slipped on his shoes. Without much else, he left. There was only one thing he could do. That day he would withdraw his application to UA's Hero course to replace it with one for their General Studies course. How's that for realistic? Or perhaps he should just withdraw the application altogether. Would his mother finally stop looking at him with that worried expression, like she knew he was destined to fail? His chest ached from what he decided was necessary. It wasn't easy to let go of everything he had dreamed of, but as he walked to school, he mentally prepared for it. He prepared to erase what he had written and face his classmates' ridicule. He figured he should be preparing for whatever Kaken would say or do too. He would probably be happy to see Izuku withdrawing. Something burned in his chest at the thought of Katsuki smirking at him while withdrawing his application. When he got to school, the idea of going straight to the principal made him feel ill. He just needed a few more hours. He'd do it after school. There was plenty of time. Why should he rush to end his dreams? So, he avoided it for the time being by going straight to his classroom. He was among the first to arrive, and when more started to enter the room, they started their routine. Each one took a moment to throw him a hateful stare and whisper amongst their friends about the poor, pitiful Deku. It's fine. He was used to that. Even when he found his desk covered in vicious graffiti, he didn't miss a beat in sitting down. In fact, he hardly noticed it anymore. Wiping it away was always more effort than it was worth. It was back the next day without fail. Usually, he would have immediately started looking through his notes and bolstering what he had seen, fixing the suggestions after having more time to think on fighting styles and quirk usage. However, today, he stared at a blank page. He needed something to distract him, so he closed his eyes for a moment, the sounds of feet falling to the background before he opened them and began to draw. It was something to do that wasn't a reminder of how quickly his life was falling apart. He could have focused on his schoolwork, but with the next 2 weeks settled already, he didn't think it was much use. If he got too far ahead or continued bothering the teacher too much, he would get a lecture. Now that he felt a void in his thoughts, it was all too clear how pointless everything felt. Nothing this school threw at him was challenging. In fact, he had finished those 2 weeks of work over a single weekend at the library. Izuku felt his eye twitch as he thought about this stupid school. His pencil dug too deeply into the paper, tearing through to the other side. Izuku paused in his drawing, flipping the page to see what he had ruined. It was a page for a hero who recently debuted just a few days prior with an interesting quirk. His eyes glazing over as he looked at the page. He flipped back another page. Split Zone, a hero active in the Nigboring prefecture. He flipped again and again and again. His stomach churned when he landed on All Might's signature. Why was he going back to this? Didn't he decide to end his dream of being a hero? Didn't he say it was pointless? It felt like a knife was twisting in his chest. While people filed in, Izuku noticed one thing in particular that was wrong. Katsuki wasn't there. Even when class started, he hadn't arrived, but no one mentioned it as the day began and class started. Izuku tried to ignore the worry in his gut and busied himself with doodling on a fresh page. He shouldn't care so much about someone who made his life miserable. Yeah, he should just forget it. Kaken. Katsuki would never acknowledge him or be nice to him as long as he was quirkless. Instead of listening to his lectures and paying attention like a good student, he doodled. He drew many mindless things. A flower, a hand, his own shoe, random Art Deco borders for the page and more. Then he started drawing a design he had seen on a book in the library. He couldn't remember it in detail, but he did his best. It felt good to be engrossed in the drawing, perfecting each circle, sharp line, and the small designs in them. There was no time to think about what he had to do that day. By the time class was ending, he had a detailed arcane circle. There was only one thing missing. The twisted triangle at the very center was empty, and it felt like it needed something in it or that something belonged there really. As he put his pen to the paper, he felt a jolt run up his arm. That feeling he usually got when he hit his elbow wrong on a table. He started to draw whatever came to mind, ending up with an odd F at the center. He wasn't sure why he drew that, but it looked like it belonged among the other symbols, so he left it. Izuku went to flip the page when a wave of unease hit him. He looked up at his classmates, who were all packing up their things despite the teachers still talking. None of them were even looking at him. He looked to the window, but it was the same old view. What was that? It was like some deep primal instinct was warning him of danger, a danger far worse than Katsuki or his classmates. And why was that instinct telling him the problem was his stupid doodle? Looking back at the page, he stared at the last thing he drew, and the feeling became more intense. In fact, if he concentrated hard enough, he was sure the drawing was moving in a way that was so subtle he wasn't sure if it was real or not. Everything felt like it screeched to a halt. His breath, his mind, his body, the murmurs of everyday life seemed to go silent as that voice penetrated his soul. He didn't recognize the language, but he knew what it was saying. Sparks ran under his skin as he forced his eyes to look around the room. Life had not stopped moving. Kids were still talking and the teacher was trying to rein them in. Most definitely no one was talking to him. So where did that voice come from? Was it his imagination? And what words did this voice want him to respond with? Should he even listen? Before he could think further about the meaning of the voice and what it was saying, a hand slammed down onto his desk. "Hey, how many more times do we have to kick your butt before you stop being a complete freak?" a boy asked. Izuku looked up and saw that it was one of Katsuki's goon friends. At the commotion, the class quieted down to look. With 5 minutes left, it seemed their teacher had given up and was focused on something in his binder. Izuku instinctively pulled his notebook closer and forced a tense smile. "Sorry, was I talking out loud again?" he asked with a sheepish laugh, but for some reason he looked a bit angrier than usual. It couldn't be because Katsuki missed school, right? On any other day, he would put his head down and avoid confrontation, but it seemed more than one thing made today different. "No, duh, who are you stalking today, freak?" the boy asked, snatching his notebook away despite Izuku's tight grip. Izuku could not explain what this feeling was, but he felt a weird connection between his hand and the notebook. Like a tiny electric current was connecting the two. The sound of tearing could have easily been Izuku's will to live, but it was his notebook. Izuku's eyes glazed over again as he watched on in stunned silence. All of these kids cheered and had dreams to be heroes, yet this is how they act to those who need protection? Izuku realized something. All of this was the law of nature. The strong trample over the weak. They get eaten to further the stronger beast's survival. That was how life had always been, yet here he was filled with a feeling he couldn't name. It could have been rage, fueled by the ridicule he faced for simply being different, by being weak. It could have been sorrow, fueled by the fact his notebook had been torn, while people laughed, much like they laugh at his aspirations. It could be the feeling of helplessness fueled by his idol tearing apart the future he wanted for himself. That voice again. That voice spoke so loudly to him, making everyone in front of him sound so distant. This time, however, he somehow knew what to say. "I call to Yggdrasil," Izuku said, but it didn't feel like he was the one who had said them. It felt more like some unknown force had pulled the words from him. Before Izuku fully regained himself, the ground lit up beneath him, sending sparks of energy through his body. At first, everyone froze in shock, including Izuku. What he was staring at looked like an arcane circle of some kind, pulsating and spinning around him. Then the chaos began. A blast of energy rocketed forth from the light beneath him, swirling around him like he was in the eye of a massive storm. Everything outside the eye was flung away with enough force to break bones. Not that Izuku could tell, Nor did he care enough to realize what was happening outside his sanctuary. The energy around him swirled in every color, bringing him far away from his classroom. It almost felt like he was flying before the lights dissipated, leaving him in a black. "Hello," Izuku called, but his voice echoed endlessly into the abyss. "Walk forward, boy," the voice from before spoke, but it was less imposing this time. Izuku did as he was told and walked forward. The further we walked, the more he could see. Before him was a massive tree glowing with energy and ethereal in its own way. Soon, his feet touched grass, and he assumed this was where he was supposed to be. "Where am I?" Izuku asked, looking around. There was a high cliff to one side and a stream to the other, leaving only a small path toward the giant tree. Though, it was so dim and dark that if he tried to walk it, he was sure he would end up wet or bruised. "Your given name is Izuku," a male voice said. It was older and much clearer than before, but it was undoubtedly the one speaking to him this whole time. "Interesting boy for an interesting future," a woman spoke right after. Looking up to the cliff, he saw two people standing on the ledge, not that he could make out any details as it was far too dark, and behind them was the only light source. "He is too small," another male voice said. He found the path toward the tree now blocked by a hulking figure. "You are too harsh, he is only mortal." A new female voice spoke, and he found a figure standing across the stream. This one was a little different, as next to her stood a massive creature. "Silence, Frigga," the eldest boomed, giving Izuku no place to speak up. Not that he could or wanted to. They all had a presence that took his words away. They radiated the same power that he felt when he stood before all might know, it may be greater. His jaw was locked in place, fearing or perhaps admiring the figures before him. "Yes, dear husband." Frigga, as Izuku now knew, answered with an audible smirk. Izuku could clearly see her eyes begin to glow. "The choice is up to you and you alone, dear husband, but I see potential," she said as the glow faded away. "Is that good or bad?" the one blocking the path asked, but Frigga didn't answer. "Father." "It's decided," the eldest spoke sternly. "Izuku, child of Midgard, do you accept the gift of Yggdrasil? Do you accept all that comes with it?" He felt a sudden release from their overwhelming presence, enough to speak. "Yggdrasil?" Izuku mirrored, looking behind him at the giant tree. He couldn't say he was well versed in mythology, but he knew enough that he understood that Yggdrasil was the actual name of the tree of life that people talk about in online fantasy forums. That giant tree couldn't be the tree of myth, right? "I don't understand. What gift?" "You are one of few who the tree has chosen to carry the knowledge of runes, but it is not charity. Trials must be overcome. To overcome them, you will be granted great power," the elder explained, and another thing clicked. Odin, the leader of the gods of the Norse pantheon. The only thing he really knew about Odin was he was known as the wisest among Norse gods. "Now's not the time. Boy, answer already," the one blocking the path yelled, snapping Izuku to his senses. "I accept," Izuku called out, and only seconds later he snapped his mouth shut with regret. He should have asked what kind of trials he had to overcome, but taking his word back in front of gods wouldn't have been good, right? "Good. And as a gift of my own," he said, stamping his staff into the ground. Izuku's chest began to glow blue around where his heart was. "A bit of advice, child of man." The female with the giant beast next to her said, "Master the old man's gift quickly. The trials he speaks of are no easy feat." Izuku felt a sinking feeling, but somehow, he felt that if he asked about the trials, he would get no answers from them. "Our time runs short. Don't disappoint us now. Until we meet again, child of Midgard. Farewell." "Yes, I hope we meet again under less strict circumstances." Izuku felt a chill run up his spine at the last voice. There had been someone standing behind him. He spun around as the energy swirled but only caught sight of two stark green eyes before he was snatched away from the great tree and plopped right back where he had started. Izuku was startled awake to find he was lying in a bed. He was lying in his bed, surrounded by all might memorabilia. How did he get home? No, how long was he asleep? Had that been a crazy dream? No, Don't get ahead of yourself, Izuku. The boy sat up and placed a hand on his chest. The glow had been right beneath his palm. Was that gift still there? As if to answer his unvoiced question, the glow returned, though much weaker than when he had stood in front of Odin and the world tree itself. It had definitely been real. He had been in the presence of 14.5. 5 gods, including the one that he hadn't noticed until the last second. But who the hell were they? Odin and Frigga were the only ones he was sure he knew. A lot of research to do, he sighed with a breathy laugh. Once it faded away, he looked down at himself. Knowledge of runes, he muttered before a loud growl interrupted him. Okay, food first and then research, he nodded as he slipped out of bed. Immediately he noticed he was also in his pajamas. Exiting his room, he saw that everything was dark. Spooked for only a moment, he realized his mother was supposed to work the night shift tonight, so she must have already left. Now feeling a bit more at ease, he walked to the kitchen and turned the light on. As expected, there was a note on the counter and food in the microwave for him. The problem was that it was 4 in the morning. He had been unconscious for 13 hours. Now, knowing this, he sat down and ate his curry with a healthy amount of rice mixed in. Since yesterday was Friday, that meant he had 2 days until he had to go back to school. That was perfect. He could figure out what Odin's gift was. He hummed in excitement as he enjoyed his breakfast, all the while planning what he was supposed to do that day. The first was to do his research on Norse mythology for obvious reasons, and the second was to do whatever he could to understand Odin's gift. Yes, it was a short list, but he had a feeling it would take a lot longer than just a day to do. All right, he exclaimed as he finished eating. He rushed to put his mess away before going to the computer room to start the long process. He paused at his mother's bedroom and peered in. As he expected and already knew, she was gone. For the next 4 hours, he engrossed himself in his research and note-taking using a brand new notebook for this purpose. By the time his mother came home, he was in the kitchen getting a snack. "Good morning, Mom," he smiled as his mother rushed in and pulled him into a hug. "I was so worried when I heard you collapsed at school," she shouted as he was smothered in her embrace. "I swear I'm fine." He comforted his mother until she stopped crying. "So, what happened?" he asked, warily watching his mother as he took a bite out of an apple. "They said a student had a quirk accident." "Of course they did. I think there was one other child who was unconscious. The principal assured me that the student had a wind quirk of some kind." Usually, Izuku wouldn't appreciate the blatant lie, but after what he saw, he smiled and nodded. "It's bound to happen," he stated with a cheery smile and a shrug. "Are you all right? Yesterday you seemed a little despondent and now." "Of course. Actually, I gotta go," he passed by her. "You worked hard, make sure you rest up," he called as he decided to leave the house. He gathered up his materials from the computer room and put them in his backpack. He had a lot of notes already, but he could head to the library and continue his research, or maybe find an isolated location to figure out what Odin gave him. After all, while researching, he'd already found something interesting. So, obviously, he chose the latter option. And what better place to be alone than Takoba Beach? Runes were once thought to hold power to change the natural world and empower those of great knowledge. Divination, foresight, reflections of life or cosmic principles. Izuku reviewed his notes, which, he had to admit, were taken in a rush, so he practically wrote everything in shorthand. Even he could barely read it. "Did Odin give me magic?" Izuku asked, but shook his head. Odin had said that Yggdrasil chose him. That means Yggdrasil was the one that gave him magic. So what did Odin give him? Everything he remembered of his rushed research was mostly magic, mythology, and divination, or very commonly used in Wicca rituals. He turned the page to where he had written down all of the runes and their meanings. It was hard to figure out where to start. The different runes, compound runes, and more. How much of it was real, and how much was people making things up? How would he tell the difference? As he studied the page, frustration growing, something strange happened. The entire page was rearranging itself. The normal Futhark runes he had written down were each replaced by runes he had not seen anywhere online. Wait, was this Odin's gift? If so, it was amazingly helpful. Seeing as he is known to be wise, giving Izuku wisdom of runic magic was right up his alley. Regardless of whatever happened, he was left with a nice, detailed page of runes, what they mean, and a small note about how to use them. Mark the object with intention. Form an image in mind. Use. Izuku read aloud and laughed a little. Small note indeed. Despite that, he did as the note said. He tore out a page, chose a rune, and drew it out on a page. Now, he just needed to figure out how it should look. The rune he had chosen was called Spark, though it was written in Norse. Silently, he thanked Odin for giving him an easier route to understanding runes. Next, imagine what it should look like. Would it be a fire? Electricity? Izuku decided to think of a magnesium fire starter. He closed his eyes. Spark, he spoke and opened his eyes just in time for the paper to catch fire. He would have been impressed if it hadn't been the smallest spark and an equally small flame slowly burning the paper away. Izuku began to think about his experiment a little. It was small, too small to be of much use outside of general utility, and it was limited to just objects he was able to draw on. It felt like two very big problems for someone who wanted to enroll in UA's hero course. Think about the note. It seems very straightforward, but he had to consider who might have written it. Not very many of the Norse gods he read about were known to be very truthful. By his guess, he had met with Odin, Frigga, and Thor. The other two were a bit of a mystery, but he had a feeling one might have been Freya, who was known to associate with cats, and the beast that stood next to her had a vague cat-like outline. Maybe one of the two giant cats that pull her chariot? That just leaves the last one. How could he even begin to guess when he only saw their eye color, though he could guess they were important? Could it be Loki? They appear in many of the Norse myths and played a pivotal role overall. He couldn't confirm anything, but he felt he had met the most important figures so far, given that Odin was there. Loki was among the most important Norse gods, according to what he read. Was he limiting himself? Imagine what should happen. Spark may seem insignificant and small, but was that true? Was he the limiting factor? He imagined Katsuki's sparks. Strong, bold, one after another pops threatening violence. He picked through his bag and grabbed a Sharpie, drawing the rune on his own hand. He hesitated as he finished. What were the odds he was about to set his own hand on fire? The thought seemed to open every pore as he felt sweat seeping onto his skin. If he were to imagine it like Katsuki's explosions, would it obey him? It was worth a shot. At worst, he was next to the ocean and would throw himself in. He took a few tentative steps closer to the water as he held out his hand. Spark! Izuku yelled, maybe more for himself than for the benefit of the spell. He could feel something. It felt like the warmth traveling from his core, through his arms, and pooling at his palms. Then he saw the small sparks which stuttered to life into small explosions, popping like Katsuki used to use as a child. His hand felt the hot spots with each pop, but it was not unbearable. Almost as soon as it started, he squashed those little pops between his hands, his chest heaving. A wobbly grin grew across his face as he registered what he had done. Was runic magic limited only by his own imagination? By the lines he drew rather than any set limit on a rune? He used a water spell next, drawing it on his other hand and letting water form in his palm. This one felt cold but calming compared to the hot anger from before. He pushed the rune further and the water started to bubble. No, he had his hand palm up. Turning his hand the other way, he realized that the water came raining down. Yeah, the spell was called Drizzle. He felt stupid for not doing this sooner. Though, while it was called Drizzle, he wondered. Izuku focused on the water raining down, willing it to stop and collect. When he did that, the water did. It rained down and collected into a ball below his hand. The ball of water dropped as Izuku's mind wandered to further applications and faced his palm out toward the ocean. Come on. He muttered, focusing on the effect he wanted, and the water did cooperate. The rain from his hand was projected outward, like someone wanting to water their garden. Trying to push forward had him wobbling as a wave of dizziness washed over him, so he stopped the spell. So there were limits on runes, but it had wiggle room on power and application. Spark could create sparks as well as a flame. Drizzle could project water down from his hand, as well as let him control the water that came from him. He raced back to his notebook to take new notes based on his experiments. Wait, drizzle, summons a light rain, which implies casting a rune in the sky. He would have to save that idea for another day, but he was far from finished. He waited a bit to recover after using those spells, then he moved on to experimenting with the wind spell called breeze. Its general use was to cause a localized breeze, but delving further into it, he realized he could control its direction and intensity to some extent. It was intense enough to whisk him up into the air briefly, and only by a few inches. It would take a lot more practice for it to become useful. However, it was strong enough for Izuku to fly his notebook to him, or rather, smack him in the face with his notebook. By the time noon came around, Izuku had found, after experimenting with a total of 4 runes, that he was beyond exhausted and starved. There were times he had gotten dizzy too. He assumed that magic was the same as quirks in that the energy used as fuel for the rune's effect, and of course, it was taken out of his own body's energy. This meant he was going to have to get stronger so he could cast more runes at one time without refueling. That said, what would happen if he overused runes? Quirks vary in effects, but runes weren't technically a quirk. What if he ran out of all stamina? Would he pass out before anything bad happened, or would something more dire happen? Izuku sighed as he made his way toward a convenience store to get himself sustenance, though his mind was much too worked up to stop thinking about more applications for the runes. Even when he was eating, he continued to take notes and make educated guesses about how to use the magic to his advantage and figure out more powerful applications. He continued to think while he browsed the ready foods at the store, his mind circulating thoughts for each word he read on the spell page. There seemed to be different categories for the spells. He grabbed a few things. He wasn't even looking as he grabbed a random bento, an onigiri, and an anpan. As a special treat, he snagged a dorayaki for after training. On his walk back, and surprisingly without running into anyone, he organized all the spells into 3 categories. First were the elemental runes. This included each of the 4 elements and compound elements, like electricity, ice, and plants. Then there were the physical runes which enhanced physical presences. If he based it all on the spell descriptions, thank you for that, Odin. Mend is able to seal cracks, but he was curious if he could push the boundaries of that one as well and make cracked objects stronger. They do say when you break a bone, it comes back stronger than before. Of course, there were also things that were supposed to be applied to people like balance and focus too. Both very useful things for him. The third he was sure were made of concepts, in that it dealt with illusions and influence. Spells like Whisper for telepathic talking, how well he wasn't sure, and Veil of Illusion. Then there was the 4th category. He was thinking of calling it theoretical, but it didn't feel right. These spells dealt with abstract concepts. One that caught his eye immediately had been Foresight. In itself, he thought about Night Eye. Of course he would. It was the same name his quirk went by, and he really wanted to know if this rune could do the same as his quirk could. Izuku nearly tripped onto the beach, as he had hardly been paying attention to his surroundings while thinking so hard about all these spells and possible effects. He sat himself down and tried to think of anything else to give his mind a break as he ate his lunch. Unfortunately, he ate it so fast it was hardly a break. He was simply too enamored with all the possibilities. What kind of hero could he be when he could do it all? The next thought he had snuck up on him like a snake coiling around. I could surpass all might. It was such an absurd thought. Surpassing all might? However, it was a possibility. He had been given this power by beings beyond this world. Gods. Plain and simple. This was the power of the gods he was playing with. He shook his head to get that thought out of his mind and clapped his hands together to confirm his change in thoughts. I should try out as many as possible, he muttered to himself. Little did he realize how big of a mistake that had been. He would rename a special few spells heroic spells, because one would need that kind of strength to use them. There was a very clear distinction in power and ability. Not that Izuku had thought peeking into the future would be easy, but the searing pain and spinning vision was sobering in a way. He was weak. Far too weak to use one of those spells, or at least this spell in particular. He should have known it was advanced compared to the rest, and he was hardly even a beginner. It hadn't even been him who cancelled the spell, but he was thankful it ended when it did. The fact that it felt like something else cancelled out his spell was unnerving. He could hardly think about it. What parts of him were not focused on the pain were focused on what he had seen. He wasn't sure where, or when, the spell had taken him. All he knew was that he saw a broken vase. His mother's heirloom vase. That in itself felt like a bad omen. He collapsed onto his knees and opened his eyes through the lingering pain. "Holy hell," he muttered as something warm dripped onto his lip. He reached up and wiped it away to find it was blood. Oh, goody. There was a backlash to note down. So far, the most any of the other spells had done was make him dizzy. This one had surpassed that with a nosebleed and migraine. He was going to need to do some hardcore stamina training in order to get a hold of each category of runes. He closed his eyes again, finding the evening sun too harsh for his headache. When he opened them again, there was a wolf before him. Well, it was more like leaning over him with a kind of curiosity or worry. Izuku's immediate thought was danger, but when it liked his face, that feeling dissipated quickly. "I'm sorry, but who are you?" he asked, wondering if this was a shape-shifted god coming to check on him or something, not that he would think he was important enough for that. The wolf turned toward the sea, exposing the necklace around its neck. It wore the sign of Vaknut, the 3 interconnected triangles. "Are you Odin?" he asked, but he could tell the wolf gave him a skeptical side-eye in response. "Probably not. Odin is most well known for having 2 ravens, but his research also revealed that he had 2 wolves." "Jerry?" he asked, and the wolf did not respond. "Freki?" he asked again, and this time it noticed. The wolf almost bowed to him. Did Odin send out his wolf to watch him? The thought put Izuku's stomach in knots. The fact that it was possible Odin was watching him struggle and decided he had to step in? Izuku held his stomach and tried to keep himself calm. He looked at the wolf again, this time taking in more of its appearance. The wolf had a beautiful white coat that looked incredibly soft. Izuku reached out to the wolf carefully, stopping when the wolf looked back at him. The wolf didn't seem like it minded when he continued to reach out, so Izuku figured he would be fine. When his fingers made contact with the fur, he noticed 3 things. The first was that the fur was soft somehow, and the second was that underneath the white coat, there was a soft blue glow reminiscent of the one that came from his chest when he received Odin's gift. The last thing he noticed was the relief. His pain ebbed away enough for him to sit up. "Are you going to stay?" he asked, wondering if the wolf was there to just momentarily get him back on his feet, or if he had a new companion. Again, he did think that perhaps they were sent to watch him, but it was worth asking. The wolf looked at him, seemingly assessing his condition, before it pawed off the necklace from around its neck. It was heavier than it looked as it landed in his lap. "You're giving this to me?" Izuku asked as he picked up the necklace. A spark of energy jolted up his arm, and some part of him thought, that felt permanent. "Thank you Bunny37 for the chapter art." With Freki's help and Izuku's tenacity, his training truly began. Until Izuku gains more strength, he had to restrict his spell usage to elemental and physical runes since they were the easiest to use. He needed time to work up to the heroics, and even the conceptual runes had enough of a kickback to avoid them for now. Heroic spells were hero-level spells because, aside from foresight, there was omen. Being able to influence the outcome of a situation, even slightly, was huge. The next few days of his training, he came to realize a few things. The first was that the wolf always responded to Freki, so his wild guess had been correct. The next was that the longer he spent with her, the more he could understand what she said. That necklace had connected them somehow because, while the wolf could not speak, Izuku could understand her, or rather, understand her intentions. Her intentions were loud. Starting the moment he got runic magic, she had him training like his life depended on it for the following week. She was his trainer during the day and his guard at night, but there was a problem with the foremost of the two. That problem was that this wolf no longer knew human limitations after serving under literal gods. "Freki!" Izuku wheezed as the wolf bounded ahead of him. Remember, I'm a human," he yelled as his legs gave out. He had run as far as physically possible for his current abilities, but still, this wolf was telling him to keep going. She even stomped a paw at him. His legs burned under unwanted weight as he staggered to the side and grabbed onto a tree. She was a fair bit further ahead, but in the blink of an eye, she was standing before him, an unimpressed stare leveled in his direction. I get it. You want me to be stronger and I want to be stronger too, but can we at least go slower? He asked as he waited for his jelly legs to regain enough firmness for him to take a step. This was not the first time Freki sighed at him, but she bowed her head in acknowledgement anyway. Izuku almost sighed back. It was too obvious when Freki gave him an attitude. He could practically hear her complaint. You humans are far too weak, is what it felt like she would say if she could speak. You've been surrounded by gods for way too long. Do you even know human limits anymore? He asked, his irritation clear given he was ridiculously exhausted after only his first week of training. Rather than the wolf stomping again like he imagined she would, she seemed to contemplate and come up with the answer no. Yeah, just watching humans would be a bit different than actually interacting with them, huh? He asked, immediately feeling the tension leave his shoulders as her personality was reaffirmed. She wasn't totally unreasonable for a godly pet? Familiar? Their conversation was cut short when Izuku looked up at the sky to see that the sun was rising. I guess it's too late to get more training done. I have to get to school, Izuku stated as he started to jog sluggishly back toward their starting point, where his stuff was sitting on a bench. There had been a change in the week since Freki had come to guide him. She informed him that the more he used magic in his life, the stronger he would get. In that way, it wasn't much different from a quirk. So, he had used the physical type rune engrave to carve runes into the soles of his shoes, that spell being Gust. The breeze spell had evolved into Gust yesterday, after he had dedicated himself to figuring out if the breeze spell would get stronger the more he used it. In a way, he was proven correct. The difference between those two wind spells was vast too. He had noted in his notebook that each spell would evolve with his skill level. It had come at a relative surprise when the page had changed and he had tested out the new spell. Gust created a significant burst of air, strong enough to move him even at a dead stop. The next bit he noted down was that Gust encompassed this new power as well as the abilities of its lower level. Then Freki told him something about gaining affinity, maybe? Without real words to latch onto, he wasn't able to understand a lot of what she was trying to explain. He suspected that they were concepts that were common knowledge to gods but lost knowledge for humans. Either way, one spell was now more advanced than any other, which is why he started to think of it as leveling up. Now, why is it on his shoes? The first reason was because he got too excited about the possibility of using it to get around quicker. The second was because Freki hadn't been quick enough to stop him, and when she tried to, she accidentally threw him across the room. So yeah, he got ahead of himself and carved them right onto his red tennis shoes, only thinking how stupid that was afterwards. Well, for the moment, it would provide him a new way to practice channeling runic magic and applying it in new ways. Come on, Freki, Izuku said as he pulled on his backpack and smiled, ready to try out his Gust runes in the way he had planned. Short bursts one after another as each shoe lifted to push him forward. He turned just as Freki sent him something akin to, "Are you sure you want to use that after complaining about your legs?" Izuku didn't pay much attention to it as he readied himself. "Gust," he said, and from the soles of his shoes came a massive gust of wind that propelled him into the air. No. Izuku probably should not have tried this right before school. Just a moment after he cast the spell, the whisk burst forth far stronger than he had expected and his leg was swept out from under him. The boy's body tumbled backward onto the ground where he spent a moment groaning. Though that was not the end of it. He tried again and again, tripping himself backwards 3 times, toppling forward 5, blasting himself too far forward once was enough for that lesson to be learned. In the end, he managed to fix the output into small enough gusts to just barely force his feet forward as he tried to practice the timing of each burst. He murmured under his breath with each step. Step, lift, gust, forward, repeat. Only when he was halfway to school did he gain enough confidence to increase the output. Half because he was going to be late if he didn't pick up the speed and half to see if he could. This time he flew. Not literally, but it definitely felt something like it. While he was still low to the ground, his feet never touched it, because before they landed, he would cast Gust to launch forward again. It almost felt like he was running on pillows, and running with this technique was the only option. Going any slower than a run would cause another mishap. Turns out, stopping was the hard part. He came to a rather rough landing around the corner from his school, out of sight from the others entering the building. He had meant to use the wall as a brace and come to a running stop. The problem was he had gotten too used to landing on the pillowy surface that his gust spell created. So, landing on the hard ground had resulted in him nearly twisting his ankle. He stumbled a few steps and landed into the wall as he planned, only that landing could only be considered crashing. Well, at least he avoided planting his face right into the wall and only ended up bruising his shoulder. While Izuku recovered from his mistimed venture, Freki made a graceful approach as if to show him how it was done. Izuku watched as the wolf sauntered off without so much as sparing him a glance, and Izuku remembered just then a fundamental reality. Gifted people don't always make the best teachers. Show off, he sighed as he wiped off his uniform and face. All right, wait up, he stated once he was ready. One more thing that Izuku had to get used to was when Freki used her own magic. He wasn't sure if it was the same as some familiar magic, but Freki could use it to hide her presence, so he was the only one that could see her. When she did that, she always glowed blue from under her fur, an interesting and beautiful sight that had distracted him the first day he witnessed it. Oh yeah, he also ended up getting a lot more weird looks and harsh insults for talking to air, but that was easy enough to ignore. As he watched the wolf walk ahead of him, he couldn't help but wonder just how powerful she was. Every time he saw her use magic so fluently, he remembered just how far he had to go. This was only the start of his second week, after all. As his eyes landed on the school once again, he felt a weight press upon him. He was getting stronger, but some part of him simply couldn't open his mouth to say a word about being called quirkless. Technically, he was quirkless. He just wasn't powerless. However, he felt like both every time he entered this DMN school. Revealing his abilities had pros and cons, so many that he spent nights sleeplessly thinking about it. With the potential for his powers to become god level, he had his hesitations when it came to showing off. What was stopping a random villain from kidnapping him aside from Izuku's almost non-existent ability to fight? Maybe a passing hero, but he couldn't count on them to be around at every given moment. Then there was everyone else. What kind of questions would he get? How would he answer them? How would they treat him when he was no longer a Deku? How would Katsuki react? What about his mother? How would she look at him if he told her he had a quirk and was going to UA? It was all too much, and his head spun when he considered everything at once. Izuku dragged himself into the school and toward his classroom. If he were to reveal his abilities, it would have to be limited, but that meant that Izuku would quickly imbalance his skills, especially if he entered UA. One skill would gain significant development, but he would be forced to leave all the other ones behind. He doubted that when the gods told him to learn quickly, they had meant with only one skill. As Izuku walked into the building, he found something was very wrong. It wasn't immediately noticeable, but the further he walked, the more he realized that people were looking at him. It was mostly kids in his year, but some kids in the other years were staring at him and whispering. The problematic part was he knew why. Everyone in their year knew about Katsuki's explosive temper. So, with everyone looking at him like he was a ticking time bomb, a thought popped into his head. Say, if Katsuki's favorite victim somehow managed to evade him for a whole week and he was unable to vent out his violent urges for that same amount of time, what would happen? Freki wants to answer? Bias Freki. It means that Izuku Midoriya was not safe. Everyone knew the school would look the other way, while Katsuki taught the quirkless kid a lesson. Izuku didn't even get a foot through the classroom door when a hand grabbed his wrist hard enough to bruise and yanked it. Izuku came crashing into the room, stumbling to the floor pathetically while a Mr. Katsuki Bakugo stood above him wearing an intense frown. Even from the moment that their skin made contact, Izuku's wrist was red from the heat. First crashing onto concrete and now this? His poor uniform, not to mention his knees. Izuku didn't get much chance to recover when a shoe slammed down onto his back, causing him to yelp as he was pressed into the floor. The problem with this was that Freki really didn't like that. Izuku could hear the deep rumbling growl coming from Freki as the wolf narrowed in on Katsuki. To further the issue, Freki was only invisible, meaning everyone could hear her, and Izuku was afraid that Katsuki was about to be mauled to death. "Stop!" Izuku yelled at the top of his lungs, startling every student in the room and even some outside. Of course, Izuku had been talking to Freki, who thankfully stopped growling, but even a glance in her direction showed she was baring vicious fangs toward the boy above him. Katsuki had no idea his life had just been saved. Thus, the look on his face was murderous at the thought that Izuku had demanded that he stop what he was doing. "Stop!" Katsuki whispered in a tone Izuku knew well. He was said beyond reason. After school, the boy seethed as his goons laughed. Katsuki gave him a rough shove before leaving. "Oh, he's gonna get it. It's about time he learns his place. I hope he gets sent to the hospital." Izuku took his seat, nursing his burned wrist while Freki stuck close to his side like he was a pup needing protection. Maybe that was what he amounted to right now, a helpless pup. It was just more of a reason to get stronger by any means at his disposal. Showing Katsuki his abilities by defending himself would only fuel his anger. Izuku knew this and was not about to confront him, but he wasn't going to let himself be beaten either. He really hoped that they wouldn't be in the same class if they both made it into UA. Focusing on class that day wasn't much of an option between Katsuki glaring at him and Freki's low growl that kept attracting attention as it wobbled between almost imperceptible to prominent. Both were annoying, but by the end of class, he knew what he had to do. Run away, obviously. So, when the bell rang for school to be dismissed, Izuku had a plan. It would give Katsuki a hint of what he could do, but knowing him, he wouldn't believe it because he was Deku. Besides, if Katsuki hurts him, Freki might aim to kill after all. She was a wolf that stood by Odin, representing his connection to war. He was sure, if her objective was to protect him, anything that hurt him would die. If myths were to be trusted, gods probably didn't care too much about killing a human or two. An animal would care even less if its charge's protection is its only concern. Though, Izuku was going off human-written myths and accounts. In the end, he had no concrete evidence of anything nor knowledge of which sources he could trust. What if Odin just wanted a pair of sick wolves to intimidate people? What if they did not represent anything but the fierceness of nature? When Izuku looked up from Freki, he found Katsuki bearing down on him. "Let's go," the other boy demanded, and Izuku didn't argue with the criminal in the making, but just because he didn't argue didn't mean he was complying with what Katsuki wanted. That wasn't going to happen anymore. Freki seemed to understand that and remained relatively calm while walking out of the building. The soft clicking of her claws on the floor beside him brought him an odd sense of courage. Was it because he knew Freki would help him if he was struggling, or was it because she stood as a monument of what he could become? The thought of what he was going to do did feel as cheap as it was dangerous, given just this morning he was struggling to keep himself upright and off the ground. However, it was an escape he desperately wished for and needed. The moment his underlings looked away, Izuku used Gust to a higher level than he had ever used it since he first tried it out. The power output set his nerves abuzz with stress as he blasted himself down a side street. The desperation had his mind sharp focused on his footing and direction as he blasted around the corner and continued. He made several turns so they wouldn't find him before he stopped. He wasn't far from the beach, but he was also hungry because he was not able to stomach lunch that day. He turned every which way until Freki came into view, trotting to catch up to him. He looked down at his hands to see that they were shaking. Using Gust to almost its full capacity probably didn't help his exhaustion and hunger. "I can't believe I did that, and I didn't even crash into anything," he murmured with a wobbly smile. He was so proud of himself, and he had done it without a second of hesitation. They walked to the beach where Izuku collapsed onto the stairs, digging through his backpack for his bento. Half of it was left, and he wasn't willing to go home just yet. He wanted to continue testing his limits and training his abilities in a place where people could not casually watch him. He backtracked to the convenience store to collect more food and water for his training. When he returned to the beach afterwards, he sat on the sea wall and ate with peace of mind for the first time that day. Being near Katsuki had become unbearable recently. Before his abilities, he could endure it, mostly because he had to, but now it was different. "I don't know how much longer I can do this," Izuku muttered in reference to Katsuki's abuse of power. Freki put a paw on his leg, and he couldn't help but smile. She may not truly understand emotion, but she still tried to comfort him. It was heartwarming to say the least. "Thanks, Freki," he said, giving her a hug and running his hands through her fur. She was probably the only true friend he had in the world. When she pulled away, he finished his meal and pulled out his notebook to check up on his progress. He also wrote notes on his most recent training, labeling the muscles he trained that day. "I know you have the best intentions for me by training me this way, but I'm not sure how well I will take to this. Especially if this morning is anything to go by," he muttered as he thought back to that morning and the 5 miles Freki had tried to get him to run before school. Her regiment included a few things. The first was a lot of running. A lot. The second was using his magic at the highest capacity possible for as long he could until the dizziness caused him stop and take a break to recover. She explained something about pushing yourself to the limits. Though, again, a lot of her message was lost because she couldn't verbally communicate with him. Then there was the meditation and breathing exercises, also made difficult by their communication barrier. She had done something, cast some kind of spell that showed him fragmented visions of what she wanted him to do. Only based on those images was he able to steer himself into the correct breathing techniques. Meditation was even harder, and he wasn't sure he was doing it right. Then came the worst one. For what seemed like an eternity, Izuku sat in meditation while withstanding Freki's mindscapes. Freki brought him somewhere far away from his body to endure the nature of the spell he was training. Yesterday he had sat amidst a field of fire, where each gust of wind whipped up swirls of the blaze around him. Something about bonding with the elements? However, every snap of the fire pushed him back into his body, heaving for breath and shaking. It's all so advanced. And terrifying. Though he should have seen this coming. A wolf, even one that had superintelligence, and especially one that hung out with gods, could not comprehend how to train a weak human. This training seemed geared toward breaking every part of him, body, mind, and soul. Perhaps she was trying to rebuild him into something else, something useful for Odin. Freki buffeted at him, and he realized he was muttering his thoughts out loud, not that she needed his words to know what he was going on about. He literally could not hide anything from her. She was too strong to shut out. He tried not to think about that. The wolf left his side, descending the stairs and walking out past the giant piles of rubble. Izuku closed his notebook and placed it to the side as he followed, hearing her call for him to follow. As it seems, today Freki wanted him to use his magic until he ran out of fuel. They had worked on his wind magic until it leveled up, so he would guess she would have him do the same for each rune. Izuku decided water would be next. Izuku drew the rune on his hand. His poor journal could handle no more pages being ripped out. It was more efficient this way, anyways. Freki barked at him, more viciously than she had before, sending a strong signal to him that shouted about fire. Izuku was silent. He didn't like the fire field. Plummeting from the stratosphere had been more enjoyable. Sinking into the deepest of oceans and struggling to breathe had been better than the feeling fire liking at his skin and irritating old scars. "No," Izuku said firmly as Freki took a step forward, trying to push the issue. "I said no." "Sit," Izuku commanded, and Freki hesitated before doing as she was told. "You were brought here to help me improve faster. I get that. I understand you want me to overcome it. I will, but not yet. Please." "Not yet," Izuku explained, trying to convey the strength of his fear. Her ears flicked before she sneezed and stood to face the ocean. Izuku turned to it as well and finished the rune on his hand. He turned his palm up and outward before calling forth the light rain. The sun was setting by the time Freki allowed him to stop. His bones hurt, his muscles hurt, and his hand felt as raw as his mind. He wasn't sure how much he had progressed, but after a nearly passing out twice, he felt he had to have advanced a little. Izuku dragged himself home, the exhaustion bone deep as he opened the door and faced his mother. He walked in and heard a chair scoot out from its place at the kitchen table. He had been dodging her almost as much as Katsuki. It was just a different kind of pain he was avoiding. The stifling, sorrowful kind. "Izuku," his mother called out. He sighed as quietly as he could before pulling a smile onto his face. Hey, Mom. He beamed a bit too brightly as he turned to walk to the dining room. She was standing at the table, her hand resting by a plate of covered food like she had been waiting for a while for him to come back. Something panged in his chest as his eyes landed on the note she had been writing. He knew she cared, but she also gave him that look. He knew it was stupid and irrational, but he hated it all the more. The look she gave him as she apologized that his dream would never come true. The look she gave him when he talked about being a hero despite quirklessness. The look that she gave him when he was Deku. Sorry, I was at the library studying, he uttered his excuse as she pulled out a chair for him. He dropped his bag and took a seat. I am glad you are diving into your studies, but could you come home a little earlier? I would like for you to join me for dinner, she said carefully, as if the words had rosy thorns or had some kind of bad news lain beneath. I'll try, but entrance exams are coming up and I need to study hard if I want to go to UA. He shouldn't have said that. There that look came in the excuses she always used. Maybe it's time you give up on UA. Without a quirk there is such a small chance you will get in. Maybe it's time you give up on UA. Without a quirk there is such a small chance you will get in. That's why I changed to general studies. He lied blatantly. Why did he lie? He had no intention of changing to general studies and had no idea how to tell his mother he did have a chance for the hero course. He stared down at the plate of food that was still warm but found his appetite was gone. General studies. That's good, but don't get your hopes up too high. It's a very competitive school, she said, a smile on her face despite the worried look in her eye. Yeah, I'm actually not very hungry. Can I go to my room? He asked as he stood up. He shouldn't be angry, he knew she had the best of intentions for him. He knew she loved him. It made everything she said hurt all the more and he couldn't say a word against it. It created a bubbling anger within his chest, one that was far hotter than any anger he held toward Katsuki who mercilessly bullied him. More so than any anger he could have for faceless strangers who ridiculed him for being useless. It was the anger of someone whose family was rejecting him, trying to change him to fit a cookie-cutter outline of what they wanted him to be. Of someone who was simply not right in being who he was. He left even when his mother had not replied. He didn't want to look at her. Since gaining runic magic, his life had become unbearable. He was not useless anymore. He was not weak or fragile. Freki, Izuku said as soon as his door closed behind him. I need to become stronger, he explained. Izuku thought he would be met with something akin to "Noda" from the wolf, but she simply nodded her head. He nodded back before getting ready for bed. He hardly put effort into it before collapsing down into a dreamless sleep. This left Freki, his faithful guard, on watch. She did not sleep. She never needed to sleep. For hundreds of years, she stood vigilant all hours of day and night, watching over Odin, completing all tasks that he asked of her. After years of loyalty, watching Odin's sons, she felt abandoned by the one she dedicated herself to. She had been given away to a weak mortal, and for what? He had proven nothing. He proved to her that he was unable and weak-minded. He allowed himself to become a victim and said nothing. But there was a spark. He wanted strength. As long as the boy had her crest, she was bound to him, her duty to guard him at all costs, to guide him through his weakened moments. Never had a week felt so long, but she knew patience would prove who he was in time. Odin, the great tree, they chose him for a reason, and she was loyal. Her lips curled back as energy signals entered her field of view, energy she knew well. She slipped through the wall, leaping down to the sidewalk. Of course it would be him. Standing just outside the light of one of the street lamps, stood Loki. Clutched in his hand a vile creature of the between. So it starts. Loki turned toward her, only signaled by the fact she could see his eyes reflect the lamp light. You ought to be more vigilant, Mutt. Loki warned, his voice low. For the record, I did not agree with you being in charge of him. The least you can do is properly protect him, yeah? He explained, throwing the disgusting beast toward her, landing in the light. It looked like a warped bird with the maw of a cat. She sent her thoughts to him. He was told to keep his distance by Odin. She had been there when the order was given. A grin crossed the god's face. Odin cannot command me to do anything. I comply when it suits me and it does not suit me now. He explained as he raised a hand toward her. She took a step back, ears pinned and growl present and loud. This boy must grow strong to weather the oncoming storm. Loki warned again as he turned and vanished into thin air. There were no other energy signals in the vicinity that she need to be worried about. However, that meeting left a bitter feeling in her soul as she made her way back to the weak human's room. At the end of the day, she may be intelligent beyond any ordinary wolf, but she could never transcend the instincts of her birth. She walked to his bed and made herself comfortable at the foot of it. Thank you, Bunny37, for the art. Another week passed by in the blink of an eye. Izuku was advancing far faster than he imagined. The elements had almost all advanced to the next stage, but something odd was happening to the magic page his powers were written upon. The new descriptions for spells sounded like they were written by someone else. They went from straight to the point of what the spell did to rather vague ideas that sounded sassy. Spark wisps, summons tragically small orbs of electrical power. Izuku muttered out loud as he looked to Freki. Who is writing this? He asked, and if he didn't know any better, he would say she was avoiding his gaze. Anyway, all that's left is fire, plant, and sound, though those ones were the scariest ones. He would say that the volcano jumping would be easier than enduring Freki's sound acclamation. Izuku sat in the sand, close to the rolling waves, as Freki walked around him. She wasn't telling him which acclamation he was going to do, but none of the remaining ones were good, so it would be more of choosing a lesser evil at this point. At least he saved them for last, so he knew how to acclimate quicker. He stationed himself in a position of meditation, which he had mostly taken from the internet, and let his mind empty of all his worries and thoughts. He closed his eyes and as always, he saw Freki standing amidst a vast darkness. Then fire. She chose the fire's cape. I found someone very interesting. If you're talking to me about it, they must have really caught your eye. I've been watching him for just about a week now. He goes to train before school and after, never takes a break, kinda reminds me of Sho in that way. Is that why they caught your eye? Do they have that kind of quirk? No, not in the slightest. If this kid wanted, they could get all the attention in the world. That's the issue, actually. A teacup was placed on the table. A powerful quirk? Seemingly limitless. I have watched him freeze water just as well as he creates it. He can grow plants and manipulate earth, create electricity, and harness the wind. Though this is just what I've seen. Hot. Interesting. If I'm honest, it's so versatile that it almost feels like he has multiple quirks. I would like to meet this diamond in the rough. Loud Cloud, would you be able to bring him in? I was hoping you would say that. Shirakumo grinned. He stood up, staring into his full teacup and then to Netsu, who was taking a sip of his own tea. He blew on the liquid a few times before he chugged the glass with a grimace. I'll be going now, he stated, placing the cup down. He exited the office and immediately hopped onto one of his clouds. Hisashi and Sho would probably be curious that he didn't go home immediately after school, but this was important. He knew better than anyone what could happen to a kid with a useful quirk. That kid's quirk qualified as very useful. Oboro sighed as the trash beach came into view. A tragic sight that he had become familiar with as he watched the green-haired kid train. With such an intricate quirk, he could see why the kid was still struggling to train it despite being at least 13 years old. His cloud came to a stop as he looked down at the secluded spot he always trained in to see he was just sitting there. His cloud lowered until he could safely step off and onto the street. If he just lowered himself beside the kid, he suspected he might scare him half to death. So instead, he walked to the stairs and onto the beach, taking the long way through. When he turned to find the kid, he realized something was wrong. The first thing he noticed was the fire. He looked to be meditating deeply, but the fire was there, wisping around him angrily, and he looked abjectly terrified. It was a good thing he was right there next to the waves. Oboro did not feel good as he pushed a kid into the ocean with one of his clouds, but he couldn't go and touch someone who was almost literally on fire. Izuku was pulled from the burning plains by the feeling of inhaling salt water. He pulled himself up, sputtering as he salt-burned his nose. "Sorry about that," someone said from behind him, but Izuku could hardly respond as he was trying not to die. Freki wasn't growling, more like annoyed, as Izuku was pulled from the water by the mysterious person. After choking for a bit longer, he managed to look at his savior through blurry eyes, or was he the one who pushed him in? Either way, he was met with someone who looked like they were a hero, but again, his eyes were blurred with tears, so he couldn't be sure until they cleared up. "What happened?" he sputtered, which was met with a boisterous laugh. "I came around and saw you were on fire," he explained before snapping his fingers. "Oh right, my name is Loud Cloud." Izuku fell into another fit of coughing as one of the top heroes in Japan stood before him. What was his rank again? 15? He was the versatile and lovable cloud-making hero of Mizudafu. "That's kind of you to say." "Oh shoot," he was talking out loud. "But what is a hero like you doing here? Don't you usually patrol on the other side of the city?" Izuku asked, which earned him an impressed grin. "You know where I patrol?" "Wait, that was creepy, wasn't it?" "Sorry. I really like heroes, so I keep up with the news and happen to notice that was where you are often sighted there." Loud Cloud nodded in thought. "That makes sense, though I do patrol in other parts of the city. I can't say I come here often. In fact, I am here for a reason." While a grin remained present on the hero's face, his voice gradually lost the bounce of enthusiasm that was probably part of his public persona. "Well, no point in introducing myself since you already know, but the name is Loud Cloud. What about you?" "It's Izuku Midoriya, sir," Izuku responded to that infectious cheer. "All right, Izuku, would you like to accompany me to UA? Someone very important would like to meet you." His voice was serious, and the implication scary, but the gentler smile on his face was scarily settling. Something felt heavy in Izuku's stomach as he realized something. First, this implied that someone had seen something. Was he being watched during his training? Apparently, the mindscapes he entered during meditation were clear enough to see if the hero tossed him into the water to put out the fire. The second issue is, what exactly had they seen? "What do you mean? Why would someone want to meet with me?" he asked, putting on the best confused face he had. It must not have been convincing, but the hero's gentle smile grew back into a grin. "I've flown over this place a few times, and each time you were practicing your quirk, Izuku felt every pore on his body open. Now what? Was this bad?" It was, in a way. If it was so easy for a hero to find out about his training, how easily would it have been for a villain? He glanced toward Freki, searching for any sign that someone finding out about runic magic was bad, but she seemed unbothered. Was it just him thinking if humans found out magic was a thing, it would end poorly for him? Was he making up another rule that didn't exist? Besides, Loud Cloud thought it was a quirk, and he had only done things with natural elements. Maybe he was being a bit too wary. He was never given a list of rules, and myths make it seem like no one gave a DM more often than not. He took a deep breath and nodded. "I see, who wants to meet with me?" he asked, as the hero created a cloud next to him at stepping level. It took all of Izuku's strength not to jump onto it, but that meant he had no strength left to restrain the pure excitement on his face. He let out a myriad of excited giggles as he examined the cloud. "This is so cool. I've never seen your quirk outside of videos." He went off from there, blabbering out all the questions he had listed in his hero notebook. It was his second nature, had been for most of his life. By the time he reined himself in, they were halfway to UA. On the upside, Loud Cloud didn't seem to mind answering his questions and hearing about his thoughts and ideas. Yeah, he forgot he should be nervous. He could see UA approaching, and he had a meeting with someone. Someone who could send out a pro hero to get him. It couldn't be who he thought, right? As they made a landing, Izuku felt his body starting to tense. Freki couldn't be far behind, but not having her in his sight was just another reason to be nervous. Unconsciously, he was sure the thought of villains kidnapping him had taken a backseat to his training because she was there. "Follow me," Loud Cloud chimed as he strode into UA with Izuku stumbling after him, trying not to trip on his own feet as he entered the school of his dreams. He craned his neck to look at every detail, and it was just as he imagined. There were still students mulling about the campus for one reason or another, but none of them spared him a glance as he passed by. They walked until they ended up at an office, and the hero knocked. "Come in," a new voice chimed, and the door opened to show none other than UA's principal, Nedzu. "Greetings, my name is Nedzu. Though I suspect you already knew that, given the look on your face," Nedzu said as Izuku slapped a hand over his gaping mouth. Izuku bowed quickly. "My name is Izuku Midoriya," he introduced himself, which was met with a bright smile from the principal. "A pleasure. Now, I've heard a few things about you, but why don't we start with the most important questions?" And the most important question he was given. It was a verbal game of chess. What to reveal and what to hide. Should he hide anything? He needed to know with absolute certainty who he could trust with something like this. Just because he was surrounded by heroes did not mean he could blab about magic being real. For now, play with the quirk game. I can control the natural elements and their secondary elements, I mean, sound, ice, electricity, and plants, he explained and chanced a glance up to see truly shocked expressions on their face. It wasn't like he could have lowered his abilities further, given he wasn't sure what abilities Loud Cloud had witnessed. Getting caught in a lie would only work against him in not only hiding the true extent of his abilities but also how new he was at having them. "Why don't we move to a training hall? I would like to see a demonstration, if that is all right." Was he a mouse? Rat? Some other kind of rodent? Izuku nodded, but this was not the end of their discussion. All the way down and out of the building, Nedzu poked and prodded. Every question felt like a potential disaster should he answer wrong, but he had to answer. The line of questioning was in itself enough mental training that he felt exhausted. However, they entered the gym anyway. Loud Cloud and Nedzu stepped off to the side, and Izuku stepped further out to demonstrate his super OP and absolutely fake quirk. He pulled out his paper stash and set to marking each page with the designated rune and placing it on the ground. "May I ask what you are doing?" Nedzu asked, and Izuku continued with his task. "I have to mark my intention, otherwise I can't differentiate between elements." Well, that wasn't a lie. Though some of these spells seemed like he should be able to cast them outside of his reach, but every time he tried to cast a rune without it being carved visibly, it didn't work. Something else outside his abilities. The way Izuku described it, the runes were a focus. Without a rune to focus the magic energy, it felt like trying to catch a bolt of lightning and direct it where he wanted. With a rune, it was more like he had caught the lightning bolt in a jar and had a way to direct it. "Mark your intention?" Nedzu said in a contemplative tone that had Izuku feeling a bit nervous. He decided not to respond as he finished up and went rune by rune. Glacial whisper, gust, squall, tremor, grove, surge, spark, resonance. He used them at the lowest capacity, though still higher than he probably should, but who could blame him if he really wanted to impress his two appraisers? It was Loud Cloud and the principal of UA. If he were to impress either of them, it would probably mean automatic admission to the school. Izuku gritted his teeth as he deactivated the last rune after demonstrating the sound amplification. Even using all of them on the lowest level had left his energy low. He let out a yawn as he turned to look at the two observers. They were talking among themselves, and it looked rather urgent. Yeah, Izuku could see it. His life was about to get very complicated very quickly. If he wasn't careful, he would get tangled up in all his lies and end up falling right on his face. He was clumsy like that, and Nedzu seemed to be setting out the perfect trap for him. Oh gods, the intense weight of what was going on now was starting to make him feel sick. How was that? Izuku's voice shook slightly. Good? Too good? Not enough? He was too afraid to look. "Mr. Midoriya?" Nedzu called out, causing Izuku to stiffly turn to face them. Oh yeah, they were giving him a look. Partially mixed with impressed and partially mixed with worry. His quirk was simply too much. What would you think about receiving quirk training here at UA? Izuku's brain stopped working. Oh, not to say you have been accepted to UA. You still have to go through the application process and all that. Loud Cloud trailed off. I believe it may be best and safest if you were to receive training here. You have a powerful quirk which may be difficult to master without proper guidance. Nedzu explained, and it was a perfectly logical decision. His quirk had a lot of potential, and it wasn't like middle schools offered quirk training. The government did, but the paperwork and application process were intense. By the time his mother filled out the paperwork for one of those programs, he would already be in high school. Izuku nodded. He nodded because he had asked for help, not verbally. He had thought it many times. That he needed a teacher who could guide him a bit better than Freki could, both by human standards and through speech. He needed Freki's help too, but trying to communicate with a wolf and fragmented ideas was hard. On the way over, you said you wanted to be a hero, right? Loud Cloud asked, and Izuku nodded again. The two exchanged a look before Loud Cloud looked back at him with a more genuine smile. That is a noble goal. I am certain that if you receive training here after school, you will be able to advance far enough to complete the UA entrance exam. Loud Cloud let out a whistle. It will not be easy though. Indeed. I will put together a schedule for you and a mentor to help with your training. A click turned Izuku's attention to the hero in the room. Do you mind if I take that position? He asked, his eyes analyzing Izuku where he stood. What exactly was that guy seeing? He sees Izuku train a few times and wants to be his mentor? He talks with Izuku for an hour and thinks he is worth something? The team could hardly comprehend what was happening, other than that they wanted his quirk to be developed safely. Normally, that is a highly logical concern to have, as quirks often lose control. However, he wasn't sure that magic worked the same. He had yet to lose control. If anything, he struggled to grab onto the magic enough to make it do something. Having it lose control implied he had some kind of latent ability to generate power outside his current level. Are you sure? Izuku asked without really meaning to. He almost smacked a hand over his mouth at the fact that his thoughts kept leaking out of it. Yeah. Show me what you got, kid. Loud Cloud declared, and his infectious smile spread to Izuku as the kid smiled back and nodded enthusiastically. Alright, I'll train hard. After collecting some information from Izuku, he was sent on his way. Oboro had offered to give him a ride back, but Izuku assured him that he would be alright on his way. That left Nedzu and Oboro alone, watching him leave the campus. His quirk is immense, Nedzu murmured. But there is no reason to believe he is in danger just yet. Oboro let out a loud sigh. I know. It just sets me on edge. Someone with a valuable quirk. There were a lot of people who fell into that category, and usually he wouldn't. Worry about someone like Izuku. His quirk was outwardly flashy. The problem was that he was vulnerable too. Sho keeps saying that I'm getting more paranoid as I get older. He trailed off again. It's not paranoia when you know something is happening, Nedzu explained. They always disappear before they get a handle on their quirk. Oboro's jaw clenched. I think you need a cup of tea. Oboro froze, his face stiffening as he plastered a very fake and tense smile on. I don't know about that. I should go home, papers to grade, grades to grade. He mumbled as a cloud formed beside him, and he hopped on. It hardly took a moment for Oboro to escape. Nedzu turned, pausing as he spotted Mirio leaving school with his two friends in tow. Too many mysteries. Nedzu pondered. Art by Bunny37. Scene where Izuku shows Nedzu and Loud Cloud his elemental runes. It had been 2 days since the meeting with Nedzu and Loud Cloud, and it still felt no more real than it had in the moment. Even as he came bursting out of school with the sound of Katsuki's yelling for him to stop hiding fading into the distance, he still could not believe he was going to UA for his first training session and with Loud Cloud of all heroes. Rescue Hero, Top 10 in Villain Capture Rates, Cloudy Day Podcast Host, Hands Up Radio Co-Host, and Golden Hero of Mizudafu. After all, Izuku wasn't stupid enough to think that All Might ran his own charities while it was common knowledge that Loud Cloud was always at the head of his own charity operations. After meeting All Might, he was sure that his PR team was working overtime. Izuku had almost stopped to board the train toward UA, but he decided to get some more training with his airwalk instead. It was still a work in progress. Gust was a finicky rune. A little too much push, and he would fling himself into the street. Not enough, and he would fall flat on his face. He realized it was a common problem with a lot of the runes as they advanced. The low-tier ones were easier to handle, but they had a finite power scale. a little bit of creativity with the higher tier ones, and he realized he could do a lot more. Wind and ice were by far his favorite elemental runes. However, the clarity and balance runes did him wonders. If he could only train his endurance enough to sustain 2 runes at once, then he could use balance and gust at the same time to make his air walking a much easier task. He pushed himself forward, gust by gust, and eventually had the idea that doing it by rooftops was safer. He was becoming more worried about getting hit by a car with the speeds at which he was running. So, after enduring another set of visions and a demonstration of Freki using her own air walk, he attempted to get to the rooftop. Standing between 2 buildings, he stood by the wall of one and ran at the other, using gust to jump mid-run, swung his legs forward, and began to try running up the building just like Gran Torino. Of course, he smacked straight into the brick, unlike Gran Torino. Then again, and again, and again. The next time he tried, Freki grabbed him by the scruff of his shirt like an irritated mother and dragged him to the roof herself. Izuku was sure he would get questions from his actual mother about why and how he potentially broke his nose. "Freki, hold on," Izuku called out as the wolf turned to walk away, only to pause and listen. "Is it okay for me to trust someone with?" He gestured to himself. She gave him a look and he groaned in annoyance. "You know what I mean. With runes, magic, or at least with more of what I can do. Are there really things I can't tell people? Or am I making those rules for myself?" Freki huffed and sent more fragments of ideas and thoughts to him. For all purposes, Freki was probably trying to tell him to stop worrying so much. Though, there was a warning that humans were narrow-minded, brought to the forefront by a broken vision of history and its intolerance to those that are different. Women burned, children beaten and abandoned, families left to wonder what happened to their missing fathers and husbands. He could put together her words with scary ease. The powerful killed by those they trusted most. Humans do not like those who are powerful nor those who stray from the pack. Trust whom you care to, but be aware of human nature. Izuku was left with a chill running up his spine and panic flooding his veins as Freki bounded ahead to the next roof. He understood. He had read history books and knew that there was missing information. The ugly truth humanity liked to ignore. The truth that he had lived and suffered through. He knew better than anyone what it meant to trust someone. To let someone get close was dangerous when you were quirkless. He read the statistics. Half of quirkless deaths were from violent crimes. Was it so wrong to want one person that would understand? He had power now, but it was the same DMN problem. The only difference was that people would not hate him for his weakness, but for his strength. Freki barked, bringing him out of his head. He hated that she had shown him those visions, that he had to see what she saw of humanity. He stood and used gust to launch him toward the next roof. He had to make it to his training on time. It wouldn't look good on him if he was late. So, after Izuku started running with his air walk, he arrived with time to spare. He searched for the gym that was specified and found it empty, and so he stood around, unsettlingly idle. With nothing to occupy his time, he found his mind wandering back to the visions of the weak and powerful. He could easily see those visions warp into the modern day, showing visions of the quirkless enduring all the injustices of the world. He pushed off the wall and started to walk down the hall. Freki sent him questions of where he was going and an annoyed bit of advice to stay put, but while he should have felt as nervous about training as he did this morning, now his mind swirled with thoughts of who he could trust, if anyone at all. Would he be alone for the rest of his life? Would he be able to make friends or bond with people with the looming possibility of his secret coming out and destroying everything? With that thought consuming his mind, he wandered where he probably shouldn't be wandering. There were a few different gym areas in the building, and wow, UA did not mess around with the quality of their facilities. He ended up in front of a random door, and another warning from Freki tugged at his mind as he walked in. It was a large room that seemed to have technology everywhere within moving platforms and walls. He walked along the side wall when his hand caught on a switch and pulled one of the wall's panels out. It reminds him of an alley with the walls acting as buildings. He walks between them, and while he hadn't tried before when trying to get up to the rooftops to run faster, he wondered if it would be easier to use 2 buildings as a pushing point rather than walking along one like he had tried. He moved to one side and prepared to launch himself up when Freki started to growl. Izuku turned just as the sound of the door opening reached his ears. He covered his mouth as Freki joined him behind the wall, her gaze focused on whoever had just entered the gym. Izuku remained hidden but couldn't help his curiosity as he crept to the edge of the wall. There were two men walking in. One was, oh god, that was Present Mike. Mostly in his costume, he was missing his quirk directional device. The second one was more of a mystery. They had long dark hair and walked with a cane but seemed to be dressed as a hero as well. All teachers here at UA were supposed to be heroes, after all. Alright, Present Mike pushed a button and rails came up from the ground. Try not to push yourself too hard today. The doctor said that there is such a thing as training too much. The radio host explained, and Izuku found himself staring as the other man set his cane to the side and took hold of the rails. It's been years. I doubt I will ever really recover. Hey, don't say that. Present Mike walked to another switch on the wall and smacked it while watching the second. Of course, Izuku didn't bother to hear the rest as the switch the hero pushed on the wall was retracting Izuku's hiding spot. He pushed himself out of the shrinking gap as wall pushed into wall. He escaped becoming a pancake only now he had all eyes on him. Freki thought his newfound panic was very amusing. Who are you? The dark-haired one had a death glare that froze Izuku in his tracks. It had a heaviness to it that kept him rooted where he was and his mouth closed. You aren't a student. So, what are you doing here? Izuku opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out, not while those eyes were staring at him so intently. Eraser, you're scaring the kid. Present Mike exclaimed, but Izuku hardly registered it as he looked into Eraser's eyes. Was something more there than just distrust? Something burning. Something angry. Something he also felt. Midoriya. The boy's attention was pulled away from his thoughts by Oboro and Nedzu entering the gym. Izuku was half between a daze and thanking the stars that they came in when they had. He had no answer for why he was there, because he wasn't supposed to be. Hi. I didn't think you would get here so early, but here got a gift for you. Loud Cloud explained as he handed off an ID for him, and oh god, he had a UA ID. Official and unreplicable. His mind was about to malfunction for a whole new reason. The other two heroes seemed confused as Nedzu gestured to the door. I know the school campus is quite confusing to newcomers, but it seems you missed the door we had specified. This way we should get your assessment done quickly so we can develop a training plan as soon as possible, Nedzu explained, and Izuku nodded quickly, following Loud Cloud as he walked backwards, waving at the other two teachers. Principal Nedzu, would it be alright if we observed as well? A rough voice asked, the same one that held all a rage against the world itself. Izuku turned around and found those dark eyes on him again, now curious and analytical of his every move. Izuku turned again to Nedzu, swearing he had heard a small laugh come from the rodent before he nodded. That shouldn't be a problem, he said simply. The group then left for the proper gym, which was set up as more of a reinforced box than a parkour gym. Once again his last train of thought plagued Izuku. Who do I trust? Can I trust them just because they are heroes? His eyes slid across each face that watched him, and then to Freki, who was lying down in wait. Alright, let's start with assessing your quirk's basic power, Nedzu stated, as if Izuku needed a push to start. It definitely helped. Izuku nodded and began the same thing he had done last time, however, since then he had added a few runes to his outfit. The gust runes were still on his shoes, however he had used a sharpit to write the other main elemental runes down so he wouldn't have to use paper. Earth was on the back of his right hand, water on his left, and fire on his right wrist. He had hidden 3 runes, balance, observe, and clarity on his shoulder, chest, and calf. Because he had done a lot of experimentation and he knew that he could not rely on writing the runes down on paper each time. Plus, as he found out, if he wrote them on himself, he could still project them out toward the world. By envisioning it. As he was given the signal to start, Izuku nervously put medium power behind his runes. He wanted to trust them, but the thought of all that could go wrong made him become afraid of what had not and may not even happen. He glanced back once he had finished, and a similar look of concern to what Nedzu and Loud Cloud had painted across their faces appeared the two newcomers. Present Mike and Eraser thought he was a freak. Alright, Now let's test your technical ability, Nedza directed in his usual happy tone, turning Izuku's thoughts to the task at hand. How much could he reveal of his control? I have a series of tests that I would like you to complete if possible. Okay, that could be good. He could gauge how to approach each one as they came instead of thinking about it as a whole. Whoa, hold on. Loud Cloud interrupted, turning to Nedzu. You prepared tests? What kind? He asked, and Izuku felt oddly touched that he seemed defensive for his sake. Just some simple tests to gauge how he utilizes his quirk and the power scale he can control. We should move to a higher vantage point so we don't get in the way. The principal gestured to a side door, and Izuku, stunned and somewhat nervous, watched as they exited the room, never to appear again. There had to be a viewing room somewhere up higher in the gym, but he couldn't see it. Wait, there were cameras. They were probably using those. Izuku's brain started to short out when a button was pressed, and the gym started to change beyond what he thought possible. There were new walls showing up and disappearing. Alright, the first test is simple, came Nedza's voice from a hidden speaker. Izuku watched as a dummy rose into the middle of the gym. Protect the test dummy. And then, everything started to turn on. Ding, it was loud. Wind started to blast around him like a hurricane. Then there came the fake rolls of thunder, and Izuku realized those things hanging down from the ceiling were projectiles. He suddenly realized this may be harder than he thought. Izuku didn't have time to process whatever Freki was saying or trying to as he ran toward the dummy, using gust to move easier through the blasting winds until he stood next to the dummy. He could not have made it at a better time, for when he managed to stop and twist the wind into a cyclone around him and the dummy, the projectiles started to drop. When the wind caught them, they became as deadly as bullets. Now, with the wind whipping around him carrying with it scraps of metal, rock, and cement, Izuku had no time to spare into his original plan of how it would appear normal in his strength. He was actually afraid one of those would hit him. However, some innate part of him always sought to experiment with his skills. That instinct reared its head as he wondered if his earth ability would be able to help him control or even shatter those projectiles as they came at him. He would find out quickly as a sharp rock came hurtling toward him on a stray jet stream. With the earth rune on the back of his right hand, he activated it and reached out to grab the projectile as it came at him. It hit his palm, and Demon did that sting, but turned to dust as he wished it would. He almost thought this was going his way when the rain started, and several thoughts passed through his head. The first was how much the rain stung his skin when it hit, the second was worry about the Sharpie coming off, the third came with a flash of lightning and crack of electricity. Being smacked so hard and fast by debris was unpleasant as Izuku focused on keeping the dummy out of harm's way using air currents to shield it. It came to no surprise when he didn't see a large debris coming, and it smacked him in the head hard enough to rattle him to the bones. Another flash. A rune activation. Everything slowed down a bit. Izuku hadn't noticed this before with the clarity rune, but with everything moving so fast now, it became obvious it could also be accentuated by a concussion, but he didn't mind as long as things slowed down a bit. His eyes trailed droplets of rain as it hit his hand, and he saw a bit of black ink disappear. Another loud crack that seemed to ring on forever, and Izuku reached into his back pocket for his Sharpie. Ice wouldn't help him. Sound wouldn't help him. The electricity in the air was enough that he could feel it vibrating around him. He scrambled for dry skin but found none. He would have to hope for the best as he wrote the rune on his left wrist. He felt like his mind was moving so fast, but his body was moving so slow. It was there, washing away too quickly and unable to set, but it was there for a moment. Izuku dropped the Sharpie in time to block a cement piece from hitting the dummy. Then it happened, the lightning was coming at him. He could have used earth to block it, he could have moved the dummy like a smart person would, but instead he held his hands out, determined. He would not catch the lightning in a bottle. He would HRZ it in his hands. Unbeknownst to him, someone leaned forward in their seat, almost as if they knew what he was thinking and could see him without being anywhere near. Izuku was almost vaguely aware someone new was watching. He watched as Izuku caught lightning and held it in his hands. There was the familiar buzz of energy beneath his skin, but he wasn't sure if it was the magic or the electricity in his hands. The pure power. He didn't notice when the rune on his wrist was far too ruined to work anymore, nor when the energy started to burn black branches up his arm. There was a microphone screech. "Midoriya, stop!" The voice Loud Cloud yelled, and the lightning was thrown from his hands, hitting the wall with a crack. The room was silent. When had the storm stopped? He was shaking something fierce, and he looked at his hands to see black lines. Thin and branching up his hands into his arms and fading at his elbows. The door the observers had gone through flung open as Loud Cloud ran into the room and nearly flew right to Izuku's side as the kid fell to his knees and tried to catch his breath. "Why did you catch it?" the man yelled as he took Izuku's hands gently and looked over the marks. "Does anything hurt? Sting? Can you feel your hands?" The rapid-fire questions came, and Izuku found life had resumed its quick pace. Was his clarity rune all right? He was soaked. What if it washed away and he needed it? "Midoriya? I'm okay. It doesn't hurt, though they did feel weird. Feathery? Vibrating? Something he couldn't name. We should still bring Recovery Girl in to heal it," the dark-haired man said as he made his way over with the others. "That was quite a shock," Nedzu said softly, and the room turned so quiet a pin drop could be heard from the other side of the large room. "I didn't expect you to try and catch the lightning." Another length of pin drop silence. "Are you able to continue?" Nedzu's attention turned to Izuku, and the boy nodded. "Nedzu, I highly recommend having him see Recovery Girl first," Eraser said. Izuku almost forgot both of the newcomers were there, or perhaps that was his frazzled mind. "No. If I do that I will be too tired to finish. I'm good to go." As he stood, he realized that the others hesitated. They said nothing as Nedzu led them back into the observation room, leaving Izuku to fix his broken runes. He wasn't able to check the balance or clarity runes, but if they didn't activate later he would know they had faded as well. Although he hoped they were fine. The speaker blared to life again. "Your second test is starting. Continue to protect the training dummy," Nedzu explained. Izuku nodded, and what came next was almost as crazy as the first. This time, walls opened up and robots flooded the room. Nedzu was crazy. For every robot Izuku defeated, 3 more appeared. Activating Observe was non-negotiable, as without it, he would find himself unable to identify each threat to himself and the dummy. Observe was still a low-tier spell, but allowed him to sense all moving objects in his vicinity. With it, he was able to protect the dummy, though sometimes at the expense of himself as he was hit a few times. In the end, the test had proven that he was horrible at this kind of combat and Nedzu was sadistic. Izuku refused Recovery Girl's ability again as Nedzu mentioned there was only one more test to complete. He could handle a few bruises long enough to finish these tests, even if Loud Cloud was advocating for the testing to end. He could honestly say he never had someone worry about him like this. His mother worried, but she always wanted him to stop and avoid, not rest and try again. "Are you sure? If you are in pain," Loud Cloud asked, but Izuku nodded. "If I can't push through a little pain, how will I save anyone?" Izuku explained, his gaze holding an intensity that had Loud Cloud stepping back. The boy stood up and tried to steady himself. "Out there, I may get hurt saving someone. I may be the only thing standing between a civilian and a villain. So I'll endure it. I won't stop until the fight is over." He looked at Nedzu, his mind set on the end of the trials from Nedzu and his original goal of limiting himself forgotten. "Nedzu, the last test," he stated, eyes narrowing, not in aggression but rather to further impart his seriousness. The principal nodded and gestured through the door. As soon as Izuku had made it through the frame, waving a bit and favoring one side over the other, Present Mike muttered, "That kid is more bruises than person." Loud Cloud just looked sad. The boy's eyes looked just like Shuda's in their determination to prove something. He looked to Shoyuda, who was still gazing intently at the door Izuku walked through. Oboro wondered what Izuku was out to prove. The heroes made their way back into the observation room to see what nightmare Nedzu planned for the last trial. It was as horrifying as everyone imagined the sadistic chimera was capable of. Izuku stepped foot into a room of falling floor tiles and swinging pendulums. "This is the last test. Mr. Midoriya, make your way to the other side and ring the bell." He made it sound so easy, But could someone ever make it through? There were 6 pendulums, 2 of which swung in a way that the timing would have to be perfect to get through. However, his determination to prove himself worthy of his gift and the title of hero was overpowering any sense of caution he had been acting with these past few weeks. With his last test started, he took off running, using the balance and gust runes to run as fast as he could and launch him forward as a floor tile fell out from beneath him. He passed pendulum by pendulum, almost knocking himself into one. If he hadn't had balance activated, he would have accidentally thrown himself backwards into the ground, which was mostly just a gaping hole at the moment. However, it was activated and he did not fall because of it. Alas, what else could he do but fall? He discovered fairly quickly that after just 3 seconds on a tile, it would fall out from under him. Even if he moved from the tile, it would fall after 3 seconds. He moved to the tile on his left just as it fell, and he forced himself to push onward on the next fall of the pendulum. He used the runes available to him to avoid and hold the 3rd pendulum back, by creating a wall to keep it from swinging back down. His head started to hurt. This was a lot of rune use, and he was not used to activating them for so long. He just had one more obstacle left and it would be over. However, he realized quickly that the task was impossible. The next pendulums were quicker and wider than the others. With how they were moving, it was actually impossible to time it correctly without destroying them. Is that what Nedzu wanted him to do? Was it set up so he used his power to destroy it? A huge throb ran through him, a stutter in his magic. A stutter? The pendulum was coming at him in his magic stutters? He felt his runes shut down, he felt his balance become worse. This was going to hurt. But not as much as when he felt his own adrenaline and fear activate a magic that he didn't want nor know the rune for. Omen. The rune whispers from an unseen place. A female voice speaks of fates. The very air ripples with power. Fate is not one to cower. It hurt. So much. Overheated gearbox from the stuck pendulum. It breaks. The 3rd pendulum chain slips and swings to the side. Slams into the 5th pendulum as it is coming down. The chains tangle and snap. The 6th pendulum falls. The 5th is stuck. Izuku lands harshly at the finish line, his head splitting and the taste of copper on his lips and sliding down his throat. He would curse at himself, or even wonder how it all happened. Who had he heard? However, he could not think past the pain, and the observers were quick to act when they heard a scream rip from his throat. Not that he knew that. The boy could hardly hear anything beyond the ringing in his ears and the blood rushing in his veins. He knew nothing but pain. That was nothing new either. His life had been pain. Every minute of every hour of every day of the year. Mental or physical, he was in pain. This was worse than any punch he had endured, any words people said to discourage his dream, or even the incident with foresight. He thought taking a peek into the future was bad, but he had just changed the outcome of a whole situation by accident. His body was telling him what a big mistake he had made. The next he was aware, he was looking up at a white ceiling. I do not know what he did, but whatever happened. There was a sigh as a woman felt at a loss of words. It was like healing a victim of a car accident. His bones were fine, but his internal organs were damaged. Izuku wasn't sure who was talking as he looked toward the window and saw it was dark out. Oh, his mother was going to end him. He let out a small groan at that thought that he heard end the conversation on the other side of the white curtain. It was drawn back and he was faced with none other than Recovery Girl and Nedzu himself. You're awake. How are you feeling? Recovery Girl asked, and Izuku almost rolled his eyes. She had said it herself. He felt, and apparently looked, like he had gotten hit by a car. Not well, his voice croaked. He was handed a glass of water by Nedzu. He felt both surprised and not that Loud Cloud wasn't around. Maybe he had scared off the 3 heroes who had taken an interest in watching his tests. Do not fret, young Midoriya. Shirakumo pardon me, I mean Loud Cloud left just a few minutes before you woke up. It was quite a task to get him to leave. Did the principal have the ability to read minds? I am not a mind reader. Your questions are written on your face, the Chimera laughed. You do not need to fear that Loud Cloud will not return to be your mentor. He has taken you as his mentee after all. Izuku chugged the water and sighed in relief. I would recommend you stay here tonight and return in the morning. Would you like to call your parents? Nezu asked, and Izuku shook his head. I should go home. My mom will freak out either way, he groaned as he sat up. His body ached and he was exhausted, so he could only imagine Recovery Girl's quirk could not erase all the damage. He had to be really careful about using those heroic runes. He should rename them God runes given they were so intense in repercussions and effects. Regardless, with a lecture and instructions on taking care of himself for the next few days. Apparently, the marks on his arms would not go away. Recovery Girl had tried, but yet the branches along his arms remained. She instructed him on caring for the scars and to continue seeing him to get checkups. She even handed him a meal plan that took into consideration nutrition he would need for training. Despite being told to care for the scars, Izuku wasn't sure he needed to. Something in his gut convinced him they would be fine. As soon as he stepped outside, he was met with Freki looking mildly annoyed. Immediately he walked into a second lecture, this one far less coherent and filled with images of him and what he did wrong flooding his head. Freki, I get it. Can we stop for tonight? I am still in pain and have to get home. This time he would have to use the train. Using runes right now would probably hurt him more than it would help. As he sat on the train, Freki broke the blissful silence with sending him a thought that set him on edge. She considered his new mentors inferior. However, while he could tell she was talking about the hero and principal, Izuku felt she was also talking about him. Freki, Izuku said sternly. Not everyone can be a god. Your expectations are too high, and I have to remind you. Human. Izuku affirmed, but the wolf just turned her head away with a confirmation of what he was saying. This was normal. Freki was a wolf and had spent hundreds of years around gods. There was no way for her to really understand human limits, let alone mortal limits. Izuku turned away from her, lying down on his bed. If you are going to sulk, you can do that somewhere else, he demanded as the train came to a stop and he stood. She stayed on the train as he moved toward his home. The blissful silence turned tense as Izuku thought about the images she had sent him. To tell him of his mentor's inferiority, she had sent awful images of humans failing. While he knew she was helpful and he liked her presence most of the time, well, perhaps he didn't like her after all. He opened the door to his apartment and stepped in, taking his shoes off. Mom, I'm home. Sorry I am late. There was a broken vase. His mother's heirloom vase given to her by his grandmother after she married. It now lay in pieces and he had one thought. He had seen an eerily similar sight with foresight weeks ago. Freki and Izuku had traversed the house multiple times, searching for anything else out of place aside from the broken vase. There was not a single thing out of place. Just the pieces of pottery on the ground. Izuku had knelt down next to it, picking each piece from the ground carefully to avoid further damage, even as his heart raced and his hands shook. Why had this happened? Nothing else in the house seemed wrong. The kitchen was clean. Her bed was made. There was a covered meal in the microwave for him. The television had been on. Her keys hung by the door. What it looked like was that she had gone out to the konbini down the street. Far enough that she would be gone for a while, but close enough that a car was not necessary. Perhaps she had accidentally broken the vase and went looking for more repair supplies? Izuku broke things in his youth enough that his mother had kept their Kinstuji kit well stocked for repairing plates and cups. Izuku set all the pieces on the table and went to fetch the kit, checking to see that it was still well stocked. It had been a while since they had to use it. He left it on the table as he moved toward his room, deciding he would rest for a bit and join his mother for dinner. Freki did not join him in his room, leaving Izuku to skulk to his bed in relative peace before falling into it. He was still exhausted, and if Recovery Girl found out he didn't rest when he got home, he would be in for another lecture. So he took a nap, with thoughts swirling in his mind. Nezu said Loud Cloud took him as a mentee and never denied that he, too, would be guiding him on his journey. Izuku would become a hero. But what was the path that Odin wanted from him? What purpose did the great tree of Yggdrasil have for him? Well, he wouldn't be able to do anything if he didn't recover first. Hours passed before he felt something move around him, settling on his legs. It was heavy enough to make him stir from his sleep to see that Freki was lying on his bed and stretched out over his legs. It struck him as strange that Freki seemed a bit upset at Izuku and his choices, but it was nice that she could set it aside to comfort and heal him. Even as she lay asleep, Izuku could see the gentle blue glow under her fur radiating brighter than usual as it worked its way through his body. He was sure he murmured a thank you as he went back to sleep for a little longer. When he woke up again, to the light of early dawn, Freki was at the window looking out like she expected someone to be there. "Freki," Izuku croaked, his throat parched from way more than 8 hours of sleep. He was sure that he had gone to bed before the sun had even set, intending on a nap, only to find himself waking up the next day. He got up, grabbed a glass of water, and came back before he finished his sentence. "Did Mom come back?" he asked as Freki turned to look at him, her wolfy face looking more somber today instead of irritated. Her head shook as Izuku took a deep breath. He checked his phone to see that it was 7. It's still an hour until her shift ends. "She'll be back soon," Izuku murmured as he went around and cleaned up where he could. He didn't want her to come home after a very long day to a messy house. He sadly threw away the lunch she had made him yesterday, a pork cutlet sandwich, and went about making breakfast. A good pan-fried fish with fried rice made from leftover rice and vegetables. Izuku thought it was amazing. He set everything up for his mother when she got home and looked at the clock. 7. He wouldn't be around when she got home since he needed to get to school fast. If he didn't leave now, he wouldn't be making it on time. "Freki," Izuku called as he quickly got dressed and brushed his teeth, packing a bit into his bento box before dashing out of the house. If not for using his runes, he would not have made it to class on time. Though, because he was in a rush, he didn't see the stairs. Usually that was normal, but today they were not stares of disgust but rather fear and pity. He walked in and found his desk in shambles. It had looked bad before with graffiti, but now it was burnt. Plain and simple, there was no desk for him anymore. The bell rang. Izuku didn't hear it as he remained standing, looking at the chair that would not hold his weight, and the last remnants of graffiti still visible beyond the blackened wood. "Midoriya, sit down." "Where?" Izuku interrupted, his eyes never moving from his desk, even as students around him snickered and waited for his reaction. "Right here," a familiar voice said, one he had been avoiding for weeks. Bakugo Katsuki had the audacity to stand up, a smirk on his face, and kick his burnt desk toward him. Pieces fell off as it screeched to a halt before him. Izuku lifted his head to look from Bakugo to the kids around him, and then to his teacher. All of them had the same look that said the same thing. "Sit down and deal with it." Izuku's jaw clenched as he slowly nodded, eyes landing on Freki. There were many things he could do. He could throw a fit, like he wanted to, show everyone he wasn't quirkless anymore, perhaps scare a few kids. He could try to report this to the school again for property damage, which never worked before, but he could try since it was school property. He could try to talk to the teacher now. However, all of it would land him in the office being blamed for things he didn't do. He nodded again, humming as he turned around and decided he would not be staying for school today. In fact, there was one place he could go for help, and hopefully, they would be willing to listen. "Hey!" Bakugo yelled as Izuku opened the classroom door and walked out to the protest of his teacher. "Mr. Midoriya, you cannot walk out during school hours." "Deku, don't walk away from me." A hand grabbed his shoulder, hot and filling the air with a sweet scent. Izuku really hadn't meant to. He had meant to just walk out and go straight to Yue. However, when he heard the first pop of Bakugo's quirk, the fear was immediate and it was intense. The air was oppressive. It was the same storm he felt in his mind that manifested into reality. The anger, the resentment, and the fear all twisted into a knot he couldn't untangle. Izuku could not speak, but his feelings were clear. He felt like he was being strangled every day of his life, like the air in his own lungs was being stolen and beaten out of him. Yet, he could breathe better than ever right now. He watched as Bakugo fell to his knees, the grip on him loosening in shock, rage, and fear, all present in his expression. How did it feel to be afraid? To feel yourself forced to your knees? Bakugo couldn't breathe. He was choking, trying to use his quirk without the ability to catch enough air to do anything other than try to grab Izuku to make him stop. He felt the rune, a low buzzing coursing up his legs, disengage and Freckie's warmth press against his leg as Bakugo fell to his knees, wheezing. A new kind of fear flooded him. He had accidentally done to Bakugo the same thing Bakugo was doing to him. That was not the kind of person he wanted to be. So he ran to the only place he could think of. He ran straight to UA. If he had stayed, things would have gotten out of control, especially given the fact that Izuku's mind was spiraling. The same thing had happened the day before. Why were the runes activating on their own? Even when he had cast the lightning spell, he still had to activate the rune orally. The only difference was that he imagined holding the lightning instead of creating it. He was starting to feel like he was out of control. As soon as the school came into view, he stopped, looking around until Freckie came into view. "Freckie, what is happening? Why are the runes activating on their own?" he asked as the wolf came trotting up to him. She gave him a vague answer about getting better, but this wasn't better. If he could just activate these things because he was angry or scared, who knows what would happen and when. He knelt down, trying to breathe as his eyes burned. "This isn't better, Freckie. I could hurt someone. If I can't control this," Freckie barked viciously at him, cutting his sentence off as she sent fragmented thoughts to him. Control. Stronger. A few tears still fell. He had still accidentally attacked Bakugo, and he had to tell Nezu and Loud Cloud before anyone could get too far about accusing him of things. His heart rate slowed, but still pumped hard and heavy in his chest as he pushed himself up and forced himself to walk forward. Such an obvious answer that his own panic had made an irrational thought. He had to train and use the runes more to gain control. After all, quirk accidents happen, right? A quirkless kid getting a quirk would warrant that excuse, though it wasn't far from the truth. He walked straight to Nedza's office, ignoring the curious looks of passing students as he looked up. His eyes caught on every security camera he passed, very purposefully as he noticed them moving with him. By the time he arrived at the principal's office, he was certain Nedzu knew he was there. It was confirmed when he was called in the moment he moved to knock. "Mr. Midoriya, may I ask what you are doing here so early? I was sure we agreed to meet every day after school." The principal folded his hands, waiting for Izuku's answer. Izuku couldn't just come out and tell him what happened without context, so Izuku spilled every last detail. He started by explaining the brutal bullying he had experienced since he was a child and the increasing severity. He explained how Aldera had never once been concerned for his safety nor protected him, rather blaming everything on him. Then he explained the events of the day and how he had accidentally choked Bakugo. By the time Izuku was done, his face was red and his eyes were burning. "I didn't mean to, but I knew if I stayed they would blame everything on me like they always do," he whimpered, rubbing at his eyes. He didn't see how Nedzu's smile twitched, nor the worry that was just barely visible through a carefully crafted facade. "You got your quirk? When?" Nedzu asked, and Izuku paused. Had he mentioned something about being quirkless? It's not like he could lie now anyway. "Almost 3 months ago," Izuku murmured, chancing a glance up. Nedzu looked like some puzzle pieces had been revealed of the Izuku Midoriya mystery. Oh yeah, Izuku was no idiot. Things were going to get bad and fast. Did he make a mistake? The visions that Freckie showed him before came back to him in full force. The powerful being forced into chains of servitude or being destroyed. His quirk was far more than so many could hope to have and was now proving too much for him to control. Tears clouded his vision as he heard Nedzu make a call. He could hardly hear the exchange over his thrumming heart, but what he did catch was that he was talking to a detective and a hero. His gaze turned to Freckie, who seemed calm despite the potential threat he was under. She locked eyes with him, her blue to his green, and stood to move closer. He could feel her irritation, or rather mock irritation, as he was sure she would not try to comfort him if she was actually irritated. Surely if someone tried to impede his progress, she would step in, but his nerves would not settle as he held his head in his hands and tried to focus on the weight of Freckie leaning on him. "Midoriya? Please don't." He wanted to trust him. Loud Cloud and Nedzu were people he wanted to trust, but he was so confused and scared. Midoriya? He should have rejected Yggdrasil. He should have told the gods there were better people to take this power. What had he accomplished? Freckie told him he wasn't progressing fast enough and now he was a danger to those around him. One stray emotion could trigger a rune and kill someone. Midoriya. So, even now, he could feel the strain of the gust rune trying to activate, only blocked by Freckie's presence. He was a danger to people. His own emotions were too volatile. Hands grasped his shoulders, breaking him out of his own thoughts. It was hard to see through his tears, but he could tell it was Loud Cloud. His signature pale blue hair was easy to distinguish against the walls of Ned's office. His eyes tried to focus but simply wouldn't as his chest stuttered for. You need to breathe. One hand left and a warm cup was pressed into his hands. Accidents happen, he stated, and something about his soft tone and the protective undercurrent that came with it wrapped around Izuku like a safety blanket. Did you hear what Nedza said? He asked. Izuku shook his head, taking small sips of the green tea. In the next few minutes, Izuku learned what the next steps of his path would be. Given his quirk being so powerful and unpracticed, Nedzu had deemed it necessary to take steps to not only protect Izuku himself but the public. First, Izuku would be moved onto UA grounds and placed under the watchful eye of Loud Cloud or Nedzu. Second, Izuku's schooling would be undertaken by Nedzu and separate from the jurisdiction of UA. Third, Izuku must be escorted to any destination off UA grounds by pro-hero Eraserhead and a secondary guardian. Fourth, Izuku will undergo intensive quirk training under the guidance of Nedzu and teachers he deems necessary. Fifth, Izuku will not interact with UA students without prior approval. He was surprised to say the least. At least he was going to be kept in a fancy prison. He spent his whole life trying to get here, only for the gates to close behind him. He swallowed a sip of tea and nodded in understanding. We will be contacting your parents about this change as well. I would like you to drink your tea and relax while I make the call. Izuku nodded without hearing, his eyes staring into the liquid as Nedzu and Loud Cloud focused on organizing Izuku's new accommodation. They spoke in low tones he couldn't hear even if he tried. If he used the sound rune he would, but there was no point. He didn't want to hear it. It was quite a while and a whole cup of tea later that Loud Cloud sat beside him. Midoriya, when was the last time you spoke to your mother? He asked, voice soft and careful in the way he spoke. Izuku looked up and turned to look, only to see worry. That seemed normal for them every time they spoke about his quirk, but this was different. He almost looked afraid. 2 days, I think? Izuku tried to recall. He remembered her being home Monday morning, trying to call him to eat, but he had left before she could see him. He had been ducking her questions, and seeing her would have made him feel worse about the secrets he was keeping. He had yet to figure out how to tell her he had abilities. We contacted her phone, but she didn't pick up. That was strange. She always picked up her phone. So we called her work and they said she hadn't been there for 5 days. That's not possible. Izuku, are you sure you saw her 2 days ago? He pulled out his phone, his knees shaking as he dialed his mother's phone. She always answered his calls no matter what. A call during the school day would have her picking up in a panic. Bring. This is Midoriya Inko's voicemail. I am not available at the moment, but if you leave a voicemail, I will get back to you as soon as I can. Beep. Bring. This is Midoriya Inko's voicemail. I am not available at the moment, but if you leave a voicemail, I will get back to you as soon as I can. Beep. His knee stilled as his eyes flicked between Loud Cloud to Nedzu, down to Freki. He felt a wave of nausea wash over him as he stood up and headed to the door. His worst nightmares may be coming true. Had a villain figured something out about him and taken his mother prisoner? Had she been kidnapped by someone outside the human world? Could a god have done something? There were so many of them, and he only knew that 5 were on his side. Midoriya! Loud Cloud called to Izuku as he rushed out the door. He ran until he was outside and saw that the UA walls were activated. The entire school was surrounded by confused students on both sides, wondering what had happened. What do you think rushing out there is going to do? Loud Cloud wheezed as he came to a stop behind Izuku. I need to find her. This is my fault, he yelled as he activated the gust rune on his shoes. Doing this without using the verbal command felt different. It felt as out of control as when he caught the lightning, whipping around him without aim or regard for friend or foe. Then something happened. The rune shut down on him. Izuku had felt the flicker of trying to activate it only for it to refuse in the end. Where do you think you are going? The voice he only heard once came back to haunt him. Izuku turned to look and locked eyes with the hero from yesterday. Eyes red and hair floating as he made his way out with Nedzu next to him. Do you think, just because your quirk is strong, that you can help? Forget the confusion of why his rune wouldn't activate. He was scared. The anger in Aizawa's eyes, the rage that never faded, had turned to him, assessing him and judging him like he was just another lucky brat born with something flashy that cameras would be drawn to. He wasn't like that. Even if he had no power, he would still go, but they would never understand that, or maybe they would. Nedzu and Loud Cloud knew how new he was to his abilities now. Eraserhead. Loud Cloud scolded without having to say anything else. Eraserhead grunted. This one is going to give me some serious dry eye. He groaned, hands loosening from the gray scarf around his neck. I gave you a general idea of our plans, however I have left out some crucial details that you will need to know. If I may meet with you in my office? Nedzu asked Aizawa before turning to Izuku. He is right, you know. Your quirk is unstable, you said so yourself, and what good would it do for you to fall victim to a villain while trying to find her? Let us pro-heroes handle this. A nod was all it took for Loud Cloud to step forward. Let's set you up in a room. It looks like you could use some time to rest. He pulled out a handkerchief and held it out. Izuku was confused until he noticed that his eyes stung and his head was throbbing. He took the cloth and wiped his tears away as a gentle hand rested on his shoulder. He knew they cared to some extent. He knew they were heroes looking out for everyone's safety. But it also felt like Loud Cloud, the lovable and kind hero of Mizudafu, was leading him into UA with the weight of chains dragging behind him, burning his wrists, bruising his ankles. UA had officially become his prison, beautiful and gilded. He was led to what looked like a nap room or something similar and guided to one of the beds. Hang out here for a while, I'll be right back. With that, Loud Cloud left and Izuku was on his own. Well, as on his own as one could be with a magic ancient wolf following them all the time. That said, Freki was missing. It only served him right to sit alone here. He was no longer allowed to be alone, which meant that he and Freki could not freely converse the same way they had. There was the whisper rune where he could converse without speaking, but he hadn't tried it yet and, well, it wouldn't be the same. He made himself comfortable in one of the sleeping beds, finding the interesting shape and canopy above him quite nice in light of his new reality. Instead of thinking about the potential huge mistake he made, he decided a nap would be preferable. So, while Nedzu and Loud Cloud did what they were going to do, Izuku closed his eyes to sleep off the shock of that morning. It was barely noon. You are telling me that kid has only had his quirk for 3 months? Shoyuta asked, his eyes narrowing in confusion and concern. That's what he said, considering how little control he has and limited knowledge, it makes sense. Nedzu chimed in. That said, I have been searching through Aldra's files, kindly provided by their principal, and found some interesting information. The first is Midoriya's file. For a child so polite and withdrawn, he has an astonishing number of disciplinary marks. He slid over a file of the printed remarks. Every excuse under the sun was inside. Shirakumo had pulled out a remark about Izuku getting into fights because he was jealous about others having quirks while he didn't, dated back about a year. Shoyuta pulled out an account about Izuku punching someone and calling them derogatory names because they had a mutation quirk, dated 2 years ago. This can't be right. Midoriya's personality, this can't be right. Shirakumo looked to Nedzu, who nodded in agreement. View it with skepticism. We are aware of the discrimination for those with mutation quirks and villainous quirks. I can only imagine the hell that the quirkless live in. Shoyuta almost growled and Nedzu nodded. However, Shirakumo did not know much about quirkless discrimination. His eyes fell to the document and to the innumerable marks on Izuku's record, almost enough that UA would flat out decline his application without seeing his test results. I will be launching a full investigation and pulling camera footage from the school along with witness accounts for these situations. However, there is one more situation I want to bring to light. The day I believe Midoriya got his quirk, he pushed out one more file. This one detailed when an ambulance was called and 2 students were taken to the hospital for a quirk accident. Midoriya was withdrawn from school for that day. This was dated 7 weeks ago. Barely 3 months. Once I get the security footage, we will know for sure what happened and when. Until then, we must move quickly. We need to confirm the missing status of Midoriya Inko, and if the worst comes to light, make Midoriya Izuku a ward of UA. Shuda's jaw clenched the same as Shirakumo's. If the Hero Commission got wind of Midoriya and his abilities, they would try to take him as well. They were fighting in both known and unknown enemies. We should bring Present Mike into this. The more trusted individuals we can surround him with, the better. Midoriya will be staying on UA grounds. At the next meeting, I will talk with the staff about his situation. Nedzu stated as he stood up from his seat. For now, we need to launch an investigation into his mother's disappearance and make him as comfortable as possible here. He did not look well earlier. After what he told us, I imagine the guilt is weighing on him. As someone with such conviction to save people, finding out his quirk control hurt those around him must be devastating. I'll get Hound Dog. Shoyuta grumbled as he stood with a grunt and left. That was a good idea. Hound Dog knew how to talk to kids about those kinds of heavy topics. I'll be calling Tsukachi. Nedzu chimed and Shirakumo awkwardly stood up. I will start making Midoriya more comfortable here, he stated as he stood and headed toward the room they had decided they would transform into Izuku's room until they could approve the plans to build a dormitory of sorts. In fact, this may be the excuse Nedzu uses to implement the dorms he has wanted for UA for some time. Shirakumo knew he needed to work quickly and make sure that Izuku was not left alone for too long. He could not imagine what Izuku was feeling. Spending his whole life thinking he had no quirk and being treated. Shirakumo had to stop and take a deep breath. He was vaguely aware of quirkless discrimination, and the fact he didn't know more or the exact severeness of it was quickly becoming a source of shame. It was a whole group of people that he had just forgotten. Well, that was going to change. He was definitely going to do some research after he finished making Izuku a decent living quarters. Knowing Nedzu, everything would be starting by the end of the week. If they were lucky, and everything went according to plan, Izuku would be living in an actual dorm by the time the entrance exam started. He pulled his phone from his pocket and shot a text to Hizashi that they needed to talk about Izuku, even though he was sure Shoyuta had said something by now. As he made his way toward the room they had decided Izuku would stay in until they can get him proper accommodations, his mind couldn't help but continue to flare up in anger repeatedly at the injustices the world threw at people who had done nothing but be born different from the rest. By the time he made it to the room and started to clear it out, his eyes were watering. He felt so foolish and helpless in the face of nameless monsters. Helpless to save the few from the many. It was so frustrating, and if there was one thing that made Shirakumo genuinely angry was when he felt helpless. As he cleaned out the room, preparing to return to Izuku so he wouldn't be alone, he let a few tears fall. When his phone chimed, he checked it to see that Shoyuta was updating him on his and Hound Dog's location. They were heading to Izuku's room, or rather, the staff nap room, to try and get him to talk about what happened today and, well, his whole life. Shirakumo took a deep breath, wiped his face, and made his way back toward the staff nap room. When he arrived, it was to see the two standing outside. We thought it would be wise to wait for you, Shoyuta explained as he pushed off the wall. Shirakumo was the one to open the door and felt it. It was a feeling only the truly powerful gave off. A feeling he had felt once when he stood in front of All Might. Intimidating. Overwhelming. Power. He felt the gaze before he saw it. Something sharp that pierced him to his soul. The hair all over his arms and neck raised as he locked eyes with a wolf. A wolf that seemed to have so much more power than All Might with the way it held itself tall. One moment stretched on for eternity. The ground beneath him felt more like the ice of a lake, cracking beneath his feet. Should the wolf decide to let the ice break, the water beneath would steal his breath with thousands of needles before carrying him away to never be seen again. Then it disappeared in a cold mist, a crinkle in its maw almost like a grimace. Shirakumo was left frozen, afraid to move lest the ice break. Maybe we should come back later? Shoyuta muttered, making Shirakumo flinch. Now drew his friend's attention. "What's wrong?" he asked, placing a hand on his friend's tense shoulder and bringing him back from whatever had just happened. Shirakumo almost looked down to confirm he was not actually standing on ice before looking toward Shoyuta and Hound Dog. Hound Dog was obviously confused, but Shoyuta looked concerned. Surely the man could feel the slight tremor that ran through his body. The adrenaline shocks that told him to run away from what he saw. Though, it seemed they hadn't seen it. He looked back to where the wolf had been, but nothing was out of place. Izuku slept peacefully on a nap bed, not a chair out of place. He took a step back, then another, until he was able to close the door. "Shirakumo," Shoyuta asked again. I'm okay. He muttered, trying to shake off the feeling as he pried his hands off the door handle. "I'm going to go back and make sure his room is cleared out," he muttered, reassuring Shoyuta again before he left. It was all in his head. No one else had seen it. Was it a hallucination? It felt too real for that, but the only other thing he could think of was that it had been someone's quirk. That was beyond him. He would have to ask Nedzu later. No, now he had to get a room prepared for the poor kid whose life had been upended in the span of an hour. It was hardly 10 a.m., and to make it all worse, he was dealing with a powerful quirk and a lack of control. A part of Shirakumo felt guilty not being in class, but he figured if or when people found out about Izuku's case, he would be forgiven by his students. When lunchtime arrived, the room that would become Izuku's was cleaned out of boxes and dust. Perhaps it had been cleaned out too well since Shirakumo was trying to forget the scare he had encountered. As one who was not a fan of lingering on bad feelings, he may have thrown himself in too far. It was a decent-sized room as well. It had a nice, rounded window and was bigger than Shuta's living room. He snickered at that thought. Once it was filled with the necessities needed to transform it into a living space, which they would fetch after school, Izuku may come to like this space. That said, Shirakumo headed toward the lunchroom to fetch the boy something to eat. Surely by now he was hungry and awake. If anything, Nedzu would have pulled him out to talk with him some more. With that thought in mind, he fetched a tray of food, dodging all the questions from his students as to why he was not in class today with a weak excuse of staff emergency since Shoyuta had also been pulled out not long after him, then headed to Nedzu's office. He didn't even have to knock before the principal called him in. To his surprise, Izuku was not here. "I thought Midoriya would be here," he muttered as the chimera looked to one of his screens. "He is still asleep," Nedzu explained, and Shirakumo hesitated. Should he wait? Should he ask Nedzu to go grab him? Should he ask Nedzu to go with him? Wow, he was thinking like one of his students instead of the professional hero he was. Something wrong? Shirakumo shook his head as he turned around, closing the door behind him, and headed toward the nap room. He knocked a few times, and when he heard a tired voice answer, he opened the door. His eyes scanned the room before he entered and set the tray of food on the table next to his nap bed. Izuku moved to sit up and looked around in a groggy haze. "How was the nap?" he asked, having a feeling that it wasn't that great. He looked like he didn't know what century it was. "Hungry?" he asked, knowing full well that some people didn't get hungry until an hour or more after they woke up. Shoyuta was one of them, not him. He always scarfed down a house before work, so did Hisashi. "Eat when you feel like it, but after we need to talk with Nedzu," Shirakumo explained as he texted Shoyuta that Izuku was awake. After eating, he would be more awake and ready to talk. This only took about 10 minutes and only amounted to about half of what he was given. Whether it was because Izuku was too nervous to put it off or out of respect for Nedzu's time was unclear. Regardless, he ate as quickly as his churning stomach could handle and let himself be guided to Nedzu. When they arrived, it was not with the people he thought would be present. There was present Mike from the other day and a new person, a student by the looks of it. "Ah, Midoriya, it's good to see you so quickly. I would like you to meet someone." Nedzu chimed brightly as he gestured to Mirio. "Togata Mirio. I'm a third year here at UA." He introduced himself. "I have asked Togata to help you navigate the school and get accustomed here." Izuku shifted between his feet before introducing himself to the older student. So this was his prison guard? He had expected it to be one of the 3 hero teachers, but he should have guessed they would be too busy to watch him. Izuku gave him a typical greeting, dulled only by the insurmountable numbness that ran through his veins. His response must have been as lackluster as he felt because everyone looked at him with a worried expression. I understand a lot has happened to you recently, and I want you to know that we are all here to help you through it. Nezu explained, and Izuku nodded, lifting his expression into something he definitely did not feel. I understand, Principal Nezu. Izuku bowed low. I am so grateful for everything you are doing for me. The real problem was him. He was the one that couldn't control his abilities. He was the one that hurt Katsuki. He was the one that saw the future and did nothing. Not now. What good was having power if it could not protect the people he loved? I think you need to rest for today. Would you like us to get someone you could talk to about this? Present Mike stated, his voice coming through the thick cotton in his ears. It was only then that he realized he was nearly hyperventilating and was leaning heavily on Shirakumo. I'll inform Hound Dog. Tomorrow morning may be a better time to set an appointment. I'll make sure everyone knows the nap room is off limits and get everything set up. His mentor explained while he was calming down. I need time to think. Can I get some things from home? Izuku wheezed. Just few things. Of course, what is it? Nezu asked, and Izuku listed off some personal items like his toothbrush, notebooks, and blanket. He also mentioned the broken vase and his kintsugi kit. He hoped and prayed that those 2 items never came. Then he was escorted back to the nap room. Izuku figured they had planned more for him to do that day, but he couldn't do much when the grief was weighing him down. His chest ached and heaved as he was left back in his cot. As he was forced to stay somewhere foreign instead of going home, surrounded by strangers instead of his own mother. Many questions assaulted his mind as he lay there as though he were a corpse. Where was his mother? Who would do this? How did he not notice? Since when had he become this complacent? Tears stung his eyes as he shut them, willing the world to go away. What had been so exciting one day led to chaos the next. The cost of power, Freki would probably say. Yet he was spiraling under the weight of what was happening and the future he could now be faced with. What had been so exciting now felt like chains and an executor's blade. Somewhere in his awe and curiosity, his tenacity and drive to make a difference, he had become blinded to the danger he faced that those around him faced. Dream fing over. Fallen from the sky in a flaming bundle of hope and fear. He curled into himself, brain refusing to calm for a moment to let him rest. Yet, he lay still aside from the shudder of his body as he tried to contain his grief. Eventually a knock at his door startled him into an upright position. His heart stuttered to life, beating frantically in his chest as he realized it was simply the door. Come in. He called as he slipped his feet to the side of his nap cot. Mr. Shirakumo entered the room, carrying with him a backpack. How are you feeling? He asked, and Izuku gave him a generic positive, hoping to let that topic drop. I have a bit of news, he continued on, setting a black backpack down with a soft clinking noise. Izuku's eyes locked onto the backpack, the ringing in his ears steadily growing. We've sent the case to the police for investigation on a missing person, and as of this moment you are a temporary ward of UA. A representative was also sent to your previous school to register your absence. Izuku nodded along, the buzzing numbness limited to his skin, which was an improvement. Thank you, I appreciate all of your kindness. Izuku responded robotically as the bag was passed to him. Inside, his blanket was rolled up and all the items he asked for were under it. The vase and his kintsugi kit. The buzzing returned, but he was surprisingly able to contain the grief that came with it. I left your clothes in your room. When you are ready, I can show you. Mr. Shirakumo spoke softly. Can we go now? Izuku asked as he zipped up his bag. He wasn't sure what time it was, but it was later in the day. It wasn't until they were in the hall that school let out for the day and the halls flooded with people. He recalled meeting a student and realized he hadn't made the best first impression. Hopefully, his emotional turmoil could be forgiven on the day he felt like his life was going to fall apart. He was led to a rather empty part of the building where very few students were and to a room he suspected was for storage. I know it's not as comfortable as your own room, but I hope it makes for a good temporary stay. His mentor smiled as they entered. The room was basic. It had a bed, wardrobe, bedside table and desk. It was roomy too, but the room only made It feel cold and wrong. He smiled anyway. This was temporary, he tried to convince himself. Only, something told him that the worst had yet to come. He figured they were trying to give him time to cope and digest what had happened today since they hadn't pushed for anything yet. That would probably come tomorrow. He put his backpack down, now alone in his new empty room, and pulled out the pieces of his mother's heirloom vase and his kintsugi kit. Like solving the puzzle of his grief, he pieced it back together. Each piece seemed to reflect all the happy memories of his life. It had been there to see it all. It was also the only thing that saw whatever happened to his mother. Tears steadily carved new trails down his cheeks, telling of a sorrow he had never felt before. This was nothing like the hurt he felt when he was bullied, for it lingered, and the longer it lingered the worse it felt. His face reflected on the reflective surface, gold cracks marring it. He stared. He hated. He grieved. He was guilty. Complacency and negligence was not an excuse. He was guilty, and now his mother was gone. The boy is progressing slowly, even with the help of my familiar. He must grow faster if he is to survive. Freya has been a little too quiet since the mortal child acquired the seedling. Do you think the Vanir are planning something? She would be a fool to betray the alliance. Who's to say she's not? She must have ill will toward us after all this time. It still leaves us with a problem. The seed must grow. Did you not hear the All-Father? Loki. What about him? There are not many who would want to go against Loki's position in the Vanir. We all know he has a stake in this and needs it to succeed as much as we. That does not solve the main issue. On the contrary, it does. Loki is always up to something and he has been silent. I say we send a messenger. Remind him of what is at risk. Wise decision, brother. I shall send my most trusted aide. Well, this may be a problem, Loki murmured as he looked upon a gruesome sight. Blood sprayed the walls of the alley he stood in, and the person it belonged to was hardly more than bone anymore. Behind him were two wolves. Freki stood to his left, her size about twice as normal as her head stood at the height of Loki's. To the man's right was Jerry, a giant black wolf with a maw of exposed teeth and red eyes that contrasted Freki's blue. Freki, you should return to the Chosen. I fear the trail will lead straight to him. Loki explained. Freki nodded and turned, bounding through the eerily silent streets. Despite the silence, Loki was feeling the beginning of a headache. Well, he would be feeling it if he could have headaches. This is only the beginning. There is no doubt that Jormungandr will feast on more than just 10 humans. Loki explained, patting the black fur of the second wolf. Underneath, the red glow was warm and made itself known in flickering pulses not unlike a fire. That said, someone else was here. Someone that doesn't belong. There was a fainter trail from a second god present. Faint wisps of essence far too faded to determine who it was, but enough that a wolf could track. Loki opened his mouth to give the order when a rumble of misplaced thunder made him pause, sigh, and roll his eyes. Loki! Loki turned to face a figure that was none other than Thialfi, aide to Thor. Can't even be bothered to send a message himself. What is it? Loki asked. A message from the All-Father. Your plans must be expedited. The boy is not growing fast enough. Thialfi explained before he spotted the carnage behind Loki. I see you've noticed why. Yes, I understand. I've just got one more stop to make. Loki waved Thialfi off, who seemed more than a little aggravated by his nonchalance. Make wise decisions. Odin's patience is not everlasting. Loki made a low, annoyed noise. Do you think me a fool? Off with you. I'm plenty busy as is. Loki demanded, eyes narrowed, a toxic green glow warning of impending danger. Thialfi gave him a bow of respect before turning. Another roll of thunder sounded with his departure. Loki scoffed at the vague mark left behind by Thialfi's fancy boots. As if anyone else is putting in as much work as I am. He murmured with a slight snarl. He took a deep breath and an equally deep sigh. Above all else, I want to see the Chosen One succeed. Odin knows this. Loki continued to mutter through his agitation before he turned to Jerry. Back to the matter at hand. Be a good pup and find the one that doesn't belong. Track them down. A vicious growl left the wolf. Wafts of red mist fell from them as they stepped forward with a massive paw.